Hey there, everybody. Good to see you all tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. It's going to be a great chat we're going to have tonight. So here we go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. We are following our normal format, which is first my opening remarks, followed by the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about on tonight's stream, the best way to get me talking about it is to buy me a coffee. And a couple of you already did. And that's good. And Kate and unanimous, you will be the first people to be answered because you already sent in your questions. So thank you. As far as announcements, we are having an event coming up in New Jersey. It will be an awesome, awesome event near the Newark Airport in New Jersey. It's going to be great. Earth is Awakening. America should join. It's going to be the way to kick off the new year. We got some big plans for organizing in the year of 2026. We're going to be announcing the next convention date. We're going to be having house parties on March 15th. We're going to be having workshops around the country. We got quite a year ahead of us, and January 11th will be the kickoff date. So if you're going to be joining us, make sure you register for the event. It's going to be good, full buffet for everybody, music, speeches, the whole 9 yards. It's going to be pretty awesome. So I hope to see you there. Hope to see you there. Yeah, it's going to be pretty cool. So yeah, that's the big announcement. So as I said before, following our normal format, opening remarks, then followed by the roll call. Then I answer questions for the remainder of the show. The second half of the show is all you guys. It's all me answering your questions. So if you got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, by all means, send a question. You can cash at me, Caleb Moffin22. You can rumble rant me, but the best way is buy me a coffee. So we're going to start out tonight by talking about something very, very serious. It's a very, very serious situation that I just can't not talk about. I feel like, as much as I'm excited about the Russia peace deal, as much as I've got feelings about Marjorie Taylor Greene and all kinds of other developments, the most important thing right now is that our friend of the Center for Political Innovation, he's spoken at CPI stuff in the past, and he's running for Congress in New York City in the Bronx for the 15th congressional district in the Bronx. He came out with a quite shocking bit of news yesterday. That's Jose Vega, Jose is a legend in so many ways. Jose has, he's known for his disruptions, and he is an anti-imperialist. He stands with Russia. He stands with China. He's running for Congress against Richie Torres, who's a mainstream Democrat. And he came out with this horrifying news yesterday, which, I think this is just how we have to start out here.
Stepdad was illegally abducted by ICE just an hour ago with no due process whatsoever, is being held in Newark, New Jersey. I was on my way to film a video about the Cross Bronx Expressway and give my thoughts on the Trump-Mamdani meeting. And I got a frantic call from my mom. She was in tears, telling me that they had just taken my stepdad, and apparently they have a lawyer We'll see what happens. This is still a developing, ongoing situation. The main point I want to drive home to all of you is that if they can do this to me, a congressional candidate running in one of the most high-profile congressional races in the entire country, what can they do to you? Why are they doing this to me? Could this have just been, indiscriminate? They just saw, some man looks Hispanic and Spanish and, doesn't speak much English and thought, yep, this guy's definitely an immigrant. Were they targeting me? Were they going after me because I'm challenging power? These are interesting questions that I don't know the answer to, but I'm posing them to you. Is my run here in the Bronx against Richie Torres and now Michael Fake such a threat to the Democratic establishment that has been working with the worst elements of the Trump administration to keep ICE going? That's a question for all of you to figure out.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it is very, very possible that they did target Jose. That this is not just random. We do know that there has been an issue with ICE randomly picking people up off the street, holding them without charges, without due process. That's an ongoing issue. But in this case, it very well could be targeted, and that may sound, like on the surface, that's not likely. But honestly, I think it is possible, and I'll tell you why. Which is that the Center for Political Innovation, I know a lot of people, right? I've been in New York City for a long time. I was part of Occupy Wall Street, and I've campaigned. I campaigned for Charles Barron, the member of Congress, when he ran for Congress. He's now in the New York State General Assembly. He was in the New York City Council. In fact, I can even show you Charles Barron, just a great anti-imperialist. I did have the honor of appearing, with him to support the Uhuru movement recently. But, years ago, when Charles Barron was just a New York City Council member before he went on to the New York State General Assembly, I was in the Workers' World Party, and we gave him our endorsement because he was a personal friend of Gaddafi. He was a personal friend of Robert Mugabe. He was an anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, former Black Panther, and we campaigned for him. And I've known other people, right, that have run for city council, people in the Democratic Party locally and all of that. And there was one woman, won't name names. There's somebody that is, I would call a friend of CPI, that is a candidate. She's run for city council and stuff like that. She hasn't won yet. One of these days she will. That's why I'm not naming her, because if I did, then they would use that against her. But she's somebody, and I remember she told me, like, at one point she ran a Green Party campaign in New York City, had no chance whatsoever of winning. I mean, she got like 10% of the vote. I mean, she had no chance. And she ran a Green Party campaign. And she told me that they sent private investigators to her apartment building, and she was shocked at how, as a Green Party candidate who only got like 10% of the vote, running for a low level seat, New York City Council, that's not, it's not the presidency, it's not the U.S. Senate. And she was running as a third party candidate who had barely any chance. I mean, she was lucky to get 10% of the vote, but she said she was shocked at how the local Democrat that she was running against spent loads of money to oust her, loads of money to dig into her personal life and talk to her neighbors. And it was like this Democrat was really, really scared that something could happen and they would possibly lose. And that's what she shared with us. And that made me realize that, getting involved in local politics is messy. There's another person who was friendly to CPI. She was a candidate. She wasn't even running for office. She was a Bernie delegate during the Bernie Sanders election, I think in 2016. And she was a Bernie delegate. And people started posting all over Twitter that she had AIDS, right? And it was like all these Twitter accounts blew up saying she had AIDS. She's got AIDS. She's got AIDS. And it was like crazy, but it was because she was opposing the Democratic Party machine of New York City, which is particularly ruthless. And so the idea that Jose Vega is running for the 15th congressional district in the Bronx against a machine Democrat, a corrupt Zionist machine Democrat named Richie Torres. He's making Richie Torres' support for Israel a central plank of his campaign. The idea that Jose Vega, they might call ICE to go after his family, I think that's completely plausible, especially given the timing, because of the fact that an anti-Israel Democrat just got elected mayor of New York City, right? And that, the regular machine Democrat, Andrew Cuomo, got his ass handed to him by Mamdani. And so Jose is also running as a Democrat against the regular machine Democrat, making a big deal about the fact that he opposes Israel, about the fact that Richie Torres is a shill for Israel. I think the idea that Richie Torres might call up Trump and say, do you want another far left guy in there? This guy Jose who's running against me, he's anti-Israel. He's, and that he might call up, the hard right pro-Israeli people and say, look, it's either going to be me or this Jose guy. I think there's a good chance that might have actually been the case. I mean, I'm not saying it necessarily is, and I don't know the legal details of any of this, but looking at this from a purely outsider view, I have not talked to Jose about this. We did put an article on our website highlighting this incident as soon as we heard about it. Shout out to Kate. She's the one who brought it to our attention first. And, we saw that Due Dissidence, which is a good friend of ours, is covering this and all of that. And, as soon as we heard about this, we decided to, publicly support Jose. He did tweet a thank you to us, and we appreciate that. But we're not in communication with him. I'm purely speculating. I know nothing about his family's situation or anything. I just know what I'm seeing here. And I think the idea that this was a targeted political move by the corrupt Democrat Party machine of New York City against Jose, given the fact that Mamdani just won, given how defensive these Democrats are of their jobs, they are really terrified of ever, losing a local race. I think there is actually a very, very, very good chance that this was a targeted political abduction, and that Jose is right in saying this wasn't random, that they grabbed his stepfather as political retaliation. The thing is, though, if that's the case, Richie Torres is a real fool, because this is the Bronx that is contested here. I live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's a very different story. You got Williamsburg, you got, Bay Ridge, you got different neighborhoods, but the Bronx is overwhelmingly Black and Latino, and ICE is widely hated in the Bronx. So if Jose was targeted by ICE, right, if they went after his family for political reasons, and it's understood that Richie Torres sent ICE after Jose, that's going to make Jose even more popular. And that's going to look really, really bad on Richie Torres' part. Richie Torres is going to look like a giant asshole, because the overwhelming majority of the people who will vote for Richie Torres hate ICE. So if Richie Torres is cooperating with ICE against his political competition, if anything, I mean, I obviously think, the top priority and the top concern of Jose is his family member, is his stepfather. But, but if this is actually the case, and if it can be established that this was, political retaliation, this is going to look really, really bad for Richie Torres. And I think it'll result in Jose exploding in popularity. Honestly, I'm looking at Jose's campaign, right? And again, we don't campaign for anybody in CPI. So we're not involved in the campaign in any way. Right? We don't campaign for anybody. And, a couple years ago, he did speak at a CPI event, but we haven't really been in touch, and that's fine. I've defended Jose against some of the slanders of Brian Becker and stuff like that. But for the most part, we don't, they're doing their own thing out in the Bronx. We're not connected to them at this point. We really aren't, the last couple of years, Schiller Institute and Jose's crowd and us, we really haven't been working together. But that said, I'm looking at this campaign from a distance. It looks to me like Jose could win. That's what it looks like to me. I mean, it looks to me like that he actually could win this race in 2026. I'm seeing, the way things are lining up. I'm seeing, the trends in the city. I think Jose could win. And if it's true that Jose, his family was targeted by ICE, I mean, that would be the stupidest move for Richie Torres. I mean, that'll make Richie Torres look like the biggest asshole in the universe. And on top of that, it'll make Jose look like the underdog, the hero. He's already got the Mamdani energy, the anti-Israel Democrat running against the local Democrat Party machine. I honestly think, this is a wild situation. So if I was Richie Torres, I would probably call up ICE and say, let Jose's stepdad out right now before this blows up in my face. That's what I would do if I was Richie Torres, right? And maybe Richie Torres didn't have anything to do with it. Maybe it wasn't political targeted. And that's why Richie Torres, again, if I was him, if I was Richie Torres, I would call up ICE and I would say, let him out right now before this blows up in my face. Because if it can be insinuated or if people start to believe that Richie Torres sent ICE after Jose's family, that's going to blow up in Richie Torres' face. Now, Jose did make one more video. He went out to visit his stepfather in the ICE detention facility. This is Jose's video.
Here at Delaney Hall, which is an ICE detention facility, and there's plenty of people here. And I just wanted to make a very quick point, which is that the way in which they treat people here who are trying to come and visit their family members that have been taken away, the dehumanization and just the way in which they abuse people here. The security guard was giving me a lot of attitude, telling me I needed to stop recording, and I had to be pulled aside by some very kind lawyers here who told me otherwise, that I needed to play by the rules here. And they explained to me a whole visitation schedule here, even though on the website it says that you're allowed to visit all day, every day from 7 to 7, Yes, sir? Sorry? Step down? Okay, no problem.
Okay, you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm built for this. Thank you.
You built for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go down there, please.
Okay. Very tough guy. Thank you. Sure.
I'm assertive. All right.
What are you?
Assertive.
Assertive.
Yep.
Okay. All right. You had different energy when the camera was off,
Whatever. Same
Oh,
energy.
okay. All right. Interesting. I can't just tell people how to come and visit. Anyway, as you can see here, they're not very kind to people who are just trying to get a sense of what's going on. But this is completely abhorrent, how they treat people here.
Yeah, and look, I have said many times that, I'm not with the bulk of the far left on the immigration thing. When they scream, no borders, tear down the borders, open borders now, that's nuts. That's not a real policy. And obviously any country is going to have immigration policy. Even if we let every person into the country who wanted to come in, we would still stamp their passports. We would still, register them coming into the country. So the open borders stuff from the left is nuts. It's just not a real policy. But that said, why the ICE stuff is of concern is because ICE is holding people without charges, without evidence, without due process. A lot of people that are documented citizens that have the right to be in this country have been rounded up by ICE and held in jail. I mean, that's crazy, right? And honestly, I think that the far left, the woke left, by making it, no borders, open borders now, they create space for this to happen, because there's a lot of people who might say, well, you got to enforce immigration law, but at the same time would say you're arresting people that are in this country legally, and you're holding them anyway. Like, that's got to stop. I think most people would agree with that, right? That you can't, but we can't have that conversation. And that's one way that the far left is kind of obscuring things. So I'm glad that Jose is standing up against this, and I hope that his stepfather is released immediately. And, we put an article on our website highlighting what's happened with Jose's case. We're with you, Jose. We're with you. We are 100% with you against this situation that you're dealing. I hope that your stepfather can be released. I know that, we will hear more from you when the time is right. These are kind of legal cases where you got to be careful, right? But that's the article on our website. We didn't really say much because we don't really know much. We just know the situation. So we just know what Jose is putting out there. And Jose is a good guy. And Jose is an anti-imperialist. Jose is with Russia. He's with China. I've known Jose. I've been watching Jose do great work for a long time. So we are 100% behind Jose. And it shows that this race that he's got in the Bronx, it's likely a very serious race. Like I said, I think he could win this time. I really do. This is not like a third party campaign to make a statement. This is looking like, you look at his website and you look at, Jose could win this race. And so I hope people from around the country will pay attention to the congressional campaign in the Bronx in 2026, because I think, honestly, Jose could win the Democratic primary. I think it could happen. I'm very excited. Another thing, I wanted to give a shout out to the Los Angeles Innovation Circle. That's the LA wing of CPI, right? In local areas, instead of having branches, we decided to have innovation circles. That's what we call our locals. And out in LA, they hit the streets of Venice Beach this weekend to say, hands off Venezuela. And that's we got Ishmael, we got Timothy, we got Dan. They were out in Venice Beach all weekend saying, hands off Venezuela, passing out leaflets, raising awareness. They were in the streets for 2 whole days saying, hands off Venezuela. They did a great job. And this is great. This is real outreach, right? And I really, that's one thing about the LA CPI faction, this LA CPI group. They're not a faction. The LA Innovation Circle, one thing about them is that they are very, very consistently out in the streets doing outreach all the time. It's great. And right now, Venezuela needs our support. Now, I don't know if you've seen the details, but the situation with Venezuela is getting really weird. So since August, the USA has been building up its military presence in the Caribbean. And the implication is they're going to bomb Venezuela, they're going to invade Venezuela, something like that. That's the implication. However, at the same time, nothing's happening, right? And, the U.S. military, it doesn't take them a really long time to build up. And the USA has been sinking boats in the Caribbean. And they've been sinking boats. They've killed 83 people so far. And their claim is that these people that they're killing in these boats, these are drug traffickers. But they will not release the names of any of them. There was one boat that sunk, and there were 2 survivors. And they sent them back to Venezuela and did not release their names. Their claim at this point, over the weekend, they've been claiming that Venezuela is responsible for the drug problem in America. That Venezuela is responsible for the drug problem. That's their claim. The drug enforcement agency's own files say Venezuela is pretty insignificant when it comes to the drug trade. That Venezuela just isn't a factor. Ecuador has got a very serious drug problem. Mexico, you got the drug gangs there. Colombia historically has had quite a bit of an issue. Venezuela, there are people there that do drugs, but it's not really a thing. Now that's their claim. And so I have been saying from the beginning of this, if this was a legit issue, they would not be sinking these boats. What they would be doing is they would be seizing these boats as evidence, right? And they would not be killing the people on board. They would be arresting them and bringing them to the United States and charging them with drug trafficking. And voices like Rand Paul and others have pointed out that, like, these boats they're sinking would have to stop and refuel like 7 times before they got to the United States. So they're not boats that one would, if you were smuggling drugs to the United States, they're not boats you would use. And if they were full of drugs, why are they not seizing the boats? They have the capability of doing that. They've got so many ships now. This buildup is not small, but yet they're sinking these boats. They won't release the names. 83 people dead. The whole thing is just a complete farce. So over the weekend, there's been a new development, which is that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he came out and he declared the Cartel de Soles, the the Cartel of the Sun, right, which is this big drug gang. He declared the Cartel of the Sun to be one of the highest and most dangerous terrorist groups in the world. Said it's on the same level as ISIS, the same level as Al Qaeda. That in and of itself is like, wait, this is a group of drug dealers, and you're saying that they're just as bad as people who, cut people's heads off and, bomb buildings, the people who are accused of in the official story of doing 9/11. And I mean, that's okay. And so based on that, they're saying that now that they've designated the Cartel de Soles, the Cartel of the Sun, they've designated them as one of the highest levels of terrorist group. They're now launching a new phase of anti-Venezuelan operations. What does that mean? Now, CBS News and some other outlets were saying that the USA is planning a mass leafleting drop over Venezuela. That's one claim. There's other claims that there are going to be airstrikes against Venezuela. There are other claims that this is just absurd. I mean, that they don't intend to do anything. The wild thing is this Cartel de Soles apparently was CIA linked, right? This is the group that was, smuggling drugs into the United States during the 1980s, was connected to the Contras of Nicaragua. This is a CIA linked group that no longer exists, right? That apparently is defunct. But now they've announced, well, this drug gang from the 1980s is run by Maduro, is their claim. That Maduro is the head of this drug gang from the 1980s. And so based on that, now they have designated Venezuela. They've got a $50 million bounty on the head of Nicolas Maduro. This whole thing is completely preposterous and completely crazy. And that there's some ridiculous angles to this. First of all, right? What country is Venezuela very, very close to? Cuba. And Cuba has the most effective and some of the strictest anti-drug laws in the region. Cuba has almost no drug problem. And that's one thing. At one point, I've never actually been to Cuba, but at one point I was getting classes. I was supposed to go to Cuba. That's a whole nother story I can tell some other time. And that's one thing they tell you is if you bring marijuana to Cuba, you're fucked. You bring drugs to Cuba, you are going to jail for at least 2 years. It's kind of automatic, right? And if you bring drugs to Cuba, Cuba has very, very strict and very effective anti-drug policies. If Cuba and Venezuela are very, very close, Venezuela definitely will not be a center of the drug trade. And in some of the reports that they've been making, it's even crazier. Like they're claiming that Maduro won't step down because the Cubans won't let him. I don't know if you've seen this. It's getting silly. They're claiming, well, the Cubans are controlling Maduro and they won't let him step down. Well, the Cubans would never have a guy they're controlling be the head of a drug cartel. The whole thing doesn't make any sense, right? Maduro is not obeying the Cubans, number one, and Maduro is also not the head of a drug cartel that doesn't exist anymore. The whole thing is just getting stupider by the minute. It's getting dumb. It's getting really, really, really dumb. And the whole thing is not making any sense. But now they're announcing that the new phase, that's the latest claim regarding Venezuela. There's going to be a new phase of their attack on Venezuela. Well, what is that going to be? Are they actually going to airstrike Venezuela? Are they going to invade Venezuela? Are they going to drop a bunch of leaflets like they said? Apparently, air traffic over Venezuela has been stopped, right? That is what has people concerned that they may actually plan to strike, right? That I guess a number of airlines got notification from the U.S. military, don't fly over Venezuela. So that seems to indicate that there may be plans to strike Venezuela. Also, today is Nicolas Maduro's birthday. He turned 63. So there was thought that they would, for symbolic purposes, they would bomb it on his birthday, or they would drop a bunch of leaflets on his birthday, or I don't know, man. I'm looking at the Venezuela situation, and I feel like Marco Rubio and his crowd, they really do want to attack Venezuela. They have a vendetta. They're the Miami Mafia, etc. I feel like Tulsi Gabbard does not want to attack Venezuela. Tulsi Gabbard very, very strongly, is a non-interventionist. And there's other people in the administration that are like that think there's nothing to be gained here. And then on top of all of that, we've got the Ukraine peace deal, the 28-point peace deal for Ukraine. And a lot of the people that I'm talking to right now are saying, Ukraine is going to reject this. Ukraine is going to reject it. The European Union is going to come up with a counter deal, and the counter deal is going to be bullshit and all this. But honestly, I'm seeing a lot of people speculate that Ukraine may actually take the deal. And that would be great. And then the war would end, and we would have an agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And that would be great. That would be a great step forward if they could actually just make the deal. Now, some people have pointed out that if Ukraine doesn't take the deal, they're just going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be eaten for breakfast. Russia's winning on the battlefield. They're having huge, huge wins on the battlefield right now. They're taking new territory. And that Trump maybe is floating this 28 points, which I guess come out of the Alaska talks, that Trump is floating these 28 points as a way that Ukraine, if they don't take it and then they just get completely eaten for breakfast by Russia, Trump can say, look, it's not my fault. I gave you all a way out. We had a deal. You didn't take it. And that's smart on Trump's part because, again, the USA is going to depart Ukraine, right? I mean, this is not, let's be real, this is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. This is a war between NATO, led by the United States, and Russia. And Ukraine is being used as a proxy. And just like in Afghanistan, it's getting to the point that they can't fake it anymore. And the USA is going to pull out of Ukraine, right? And that's what Trump came into office promising to do. I'm going to get us out of this. I'm going to get us out of this mess. But what happened when Biden withdrew from Afghanistan? There was a bombing at the airport. There was all kinds of military equipment left behind. There was complete and utter chaos, and it was a disaster. And it was intentionally a disaster. It was designed to be a disaster because the military-industrial complex wants to get into people's heads. We can't leave countries. When we leave countries, bad shit happens. All right, so there's that. Also, Biden was widely hated by a number of the people in the deep state, right? There was a big rivalry. And it's clear that as the USA was withdrawing from Afghanistan, there were all kinds of forces that were doing everything they could to mess up the process. And it was sabotaged for political reasons. I mean, that's definitely going to happen with Ukraine. The USA withdrawing from Ukraine, the war in Ukraine coming to an end, it will be a process in which they're going to try to make Trump look as bad as possible. And they're going to try to make the situation look awful. And again, that's because they want a narrative about, see, if we don't invade countries, this is what happens. Look, when I was a kid, right? It's interesting. When my parents were growing up in the late 50s and early 60s, they talked about the Holocaust in school, right? And the way they talked about the Holocaust back then, right, as McCarthyism was breaking, and the Cold War liberalism set in. The way my parents were taught about the Holocaust in school is that the Holocaust is a result of extremism. The Holocaust is a result of totalitarian movements, right? And that fit what was going on at the time. I talk about this in chapter 2 of Khrushchevism. Post-war liberalism, you had the rise of television programs like The Twilight Zone. You had books like Eric Hoffer's True Believer, and the rallying cry of post-World War II liberalism and Cold War liberalism was, don't be an extremist. Communists and fascists are just the same. America, the open liberal democratic system, is good, and communism and fascism are the same. And the Holocaust was an example of an extreme movement. And communism is the extreme left wing, fascism is the extreme right wing, and they're just the same. And that's why we need America and democratic systems, and don't trust anybody and don't believe in anything and be cynical and be sarcastic. That was the Cold War liberalism message. So when my parents were coming up, When they learned about the Holocaust in school, they learned that Hitler was a dangerous far-right extremist who said that the ends justify the means, and that's how something evil like the Holocaust happened. That's how my parents' generation was taught about the Holocaust in school. The way I learned about the Holocaust in school, see, I was coming up in the 90s and the early 2000s. I was in 8th grade when 9/11 happened, and that was the same year that we learned about the Holocaust in school. And the way that I learned about the Holocaust was that the Holocaust happened because the USA doesn't invade countries. I mean, that's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and it makes me angry. It makes me genuinely angry that this is how we were taught about it. But that's how we were taught about it, was that Hitler came to power in 1933 and the USA didn't do anything. And then Hitler, did all this bad thing. The USA didn't do anything. And then Hitler took over the Sudetenland. They didn't do anything. Finally, they didn't do anything until he invaded Poland. And what the USA should have done is they should have had a regime change operation in 1933. The second Hitler got in there, they should have said, no dictators, no totalitarianism, and invaded, and they could have saved all those Jews. And that's such a ridiculous claim. It just doesn't match the circumstances. Hitler was backed by the West because it was either him or the communists, right? And the British had armed Hitler and the anti-communist Freikorps and fighting groups. And then Hitler had reached an arrangement with a German banker named Holomer Schacht, and that there was a lot of rejoicing when Hitler came to power in Britain and in Wall Street and different places because of the fact that Hitler was seen as the only guy who could prevent communist revolution. And we all know the greatest fear of the British Empire would be Russia and Germany together. If Russia and Germany combined their forces, Britain loses any dominance it has over the European mainland. Germany is a really big country. At the time that Hitler came to power, it had the biggest communist party in the world outside of the Soviet Union. And so there was a real fear after the Blut May of 1929, the big uprising where the communists seized a big chunk of Berlin, that the communists would take power in Germany. So Hitler seizing power was something the West not only allowed to happen, but arranged because they wanted to prevent communism from coming in. But that's not the way we're taught about it. In my parents' generation, they were taught, well, Hitler is a result of extremism. And the way I was taught about it is Hitler was the result of not invading countries. And if we just invade countries more and more and more, why there'll be no more Holocausts, and that's such a ridiculous thing. But that's the way these narratives are pushed, right? And so that's what bumbling the Afghan pullout was about. It was like saying, see, we're not occupying countries. Look what happened, right? And that's what's going to happen with Ukraine. I am convinced there will probably be false flag attacks in the immediate aftermath of however the war in Ukraine ends that will be blamed on Russia. I think that's almost guaranteed. You can be sure that, some bombs are going to go off and some innocent people are going to be killed. And they're going to say, see, this is because the USA pulled out. That's what happens, right? And that they're trying to do everything they possibly can, to make the pullout go badly in order to push the idea that this is what happens if we don't invade countries. This is what happens if the military-industrial complex. Well, there's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of money on the line. And in Afghanistan, towards the end, it was revealed, stuff was leaking, that it was getting stupid. Walmart was having private one-on-one meetings with the Taliban and paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars to not blow up the Walmart store on the military base. Like, you can't make this up, right? The details about like American corporations that had stores on army bases were having private meetings with the Taliban and giving them suitcases of cash. Now, if you bomb the U.S. Army base, you can kill our American troops, no problem. But don't touch the Walmart. Do not touch the Walmart. All right. Is that our agreement now, Mr. Taliban? All right. Here's your suitcase full of money. It was getting stupid towards the end. It was getting ridiculous. And the Afghan pullout was not really a pullout. It was a handoff. It was that the Taliban had been meeting with the American government in Dubai. Mike Pompeo had been sitting down with the Taliban for months, for years, really. And they finally came to, on this day, we will pull out. The other thing that's crazy is that there were Guantanamo Bay inmates who'd been in Guantanamo Bay since 9/11, since like 2002, when the USA first invaded Afghanistan, who'd been sitting in Guantanamo Bay all that time, being tortured, being monitored, being interviewed, and they let them out. And they're now Taliban government officials. that is weird. You want to talk about MK Ultra and mind control and all of that? I mean, think about how long it's been since 9/11, right? It's been a long time, right? Yeah, and it's been a long time since 9/11, and so they were sitting in prison in Guantanamo Bay that whole time, and now they're running the government. You think the USA doesn't know exactly how to push those people's buttons? I mean, they've like studied them, and it may have been that to get out, they made some kind of deal that they're gonna, be spies for the United States over there, or maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe they implanted surveillance devices inside their bodies or something. I mean, who the hell knows? That is one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. So the Afghan pullout was crazy. But the way we were taught about it was, oh, see, the USA is leaving a country. It abandoned the women of Afghanistan. And that's not the case. And we're going to get the same thing as the Ukraine war ends. They are going to do their best. I first said this to Jamal Thomas last week, and I stand by my words. They're going to do their best to make this look as bad for Trump as possible. And Trump knows that, and that's why this has taken so long, as Trump has been trying to maneuver a way that he can end the war in Ukraine and not look bad. And I think now he's looking at his approval ratings, and he's saying, you know what, we just got to get it over with. And he's also looking at what's happening on the battlefield. You can't separate it from that too. On the battlefield right now, Ukraine is just taking losses like you wouldn't believe. And I think that at this point, we've got the White House talking about how they're going to stop selling NATO countries weapons. Like, it's all over, right? And it's going to blow up, and they're going to use it against Trump, and they're going to use it against Russia. And it's going to be, oh my God, they left the Ukrainians behind. And, I mean, that's how it's going to be. And, I do want to, there's this famous image, right? Right. I want to talk a little bit about this, right? And there may be people watching who disagree with me, and that's fine. But, this is the famous image of the USA pulling out of Vietnam. Since we like to talk about history on these streams, it's something we like to do, right? So we'll talk a little history. My goodness, is this? Yeah, here's the famous picture, right? All right. We'll talk a little bit of history here because, the Afghan pullout was endlessly compared to this very famous image, the Saigon image here. Let me put it on the screen. Hold on. Fall of Saigon, right, is what it is. The Fall of Saigon image of the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, and that's all the people lined up trying to get on the helicopter to get out of there. These are all the people that were collaborating with the United States and the government of South Vietnam. And when the government of South Vietnam fell and Vietnam was reunified, those folks figured, we're going to be retaliated against, right? We're going to be treated as traitors to our country. So we want to get out of there as fast as we can. Now, that image is often shown alongside, reports about what was done by Pol Pot and the Kampuchea War, and, the people that fled Vietnam during the Kampuchea War and all of that. And there's this narrative. And I remember during the Iraq War, George W. Bush even gave a speech where he said, we can't pull out of Iraq. Remember when they pulled out of Vietnam? What happened? There was the boat people and Pol Pot and all these bad things happened. Look how bad it was when we pulled out of Vietnam. Well, here's the thing, right? So the USA withdrew from Vietnam in 1973. It took 2 years for the Vietnamese government to completely fall, the Saigon regime, the U.S.-backed South Vietnamese government to completely fall. And then after that, what happened? Well, 1975, Vietnam was reunified. Shortly afterwards, the government of Cambodia was taken over by Pol Pot. Now, Pol Pot called himself a communist, but he absolutely hated the Soviet Union, and he was backed by 2 countries we now know, China and the United States. And Pol Pot maintained that Cambodia could have full communism in poverty, and they forcibly evacuated the cities, and they attacked Vietnam, claiming that Vietnam was an outpost of Soviet social imperialism. And he slaughtered the pro-Soviet wing of his own party in Cambodia. He then attacked Vietnam, his neighbor, And then China militarily intervened against Vietnam. And there was a war, the Kampuchea War of 1978. There was a whole war that happened in the late 70s in Vietnam and in Southeast Asia, right? And China, was fighting Vietnam, and Vietnam was fighting Cambodia, and the United States, we now know, was supporting Pol Pot throughout that whole war. That was not revealed at the time. Pol Pot was at that point considered to be a communist, a Maoist communist, and China did give him support, but his main support came from the United States. And in fact, there's a very good book on this called The Revolution Rescued by Erwin Silber. And it's a very enlightening book because there's not a lot of information about this, but you read this book, Kampuchea, The Revolution Rescued by Erwin Silber. This is a very, very good book. And there's a full PDF of it on the internet that you can read. It's very fascinating. Pol Pot was an ultra leftist. He was like an anarchist. He said that you could have full communism in Cambodia on the basis of only an agrarian economy. He said the people living in the cities had privilege over the people in the countryside, so he forcibly deported the cities. And he was trying to do that thing that a lot of communist countries fell into during the Cold War, trying to create equality and poverty. And it didn't work. It turns out the whole time he was that he was being backed by the United States. They were airdropping him weapons. They were airdropping him support. And Pol Pot was a crazy ultra leftist who was backed by the United States to fight against Vietnam. And China, at that point, China was aligned with the United States, right? And they had pivoted. They had the main danger, Soviet social imperialism, 1979. The USA established diplomatic relations. You had Deng Xiaoping. So China was in the US camp, but China also supported Pol Pot. But the Kampuchea War, it was called, that was a U.S. creation. It wasn't caused by the USA not invading Vietnam. And they point to that was an awful war, right? What Pol Pot did in Cambodia was awful. What the people who died, the Vietnam Kampuchea conflict was really, really awful. But it was caused by the United States. It was caused by the fact that the USA backed and armed Pol Pot. That is what caused it. It was not caused by the USA not invading, not occupying Vietnam. And that is the narrative that was given, was that, the USA didn't occupy Vietnam. And look, all these innocent people got killed because America wasn't there to protect them. Well, that's not what happened. What happened was the USA went from occupying South Vietnam, pulled out its forces, and then started backing proxies. And Pol Pot was a proxy of the United States, and killed a lot of innocent people, and it was awful, but it wasn't a result of non-intervention, right? And that's an important point to make. The other thing that needs to be pointed out is when Vietnam actually did get peace, right, after they defeated Pol Pot, they actually did see their living standard dramatically increase. If you look at the life expectancy in Vietnam, what it was in 1975 when they were first reunified to what it is now, they have really seen a rise in their living standards. And in fact, there are articles by the World Economic Forum, the World Business Forum, called Vietnam's Economic Miracle, where you can read about how the socialist government of Vietnam, their socialism-oriented market economy, has been wildly successful. Millions of people in Vietnam have been lifted out of poverty. They have raised the life expectancy by decades. I think at least 17 years. I think it might be more like 20 years. The population has increased. Living standards have gone up. Access to healthcare. They've got universal literacy. They've got a public schooling program. They've electrified the country. They've given the country high-tech access. They've got computer access. Vietnam is doing pretty well these days, right? It's not a paradise, and it's certainly not at U.S. standards. But for that region, it's an impoverished country from that region that had decade and decade and decade of war. Vietnam's doing pretty darn well. It's doing very well. And that's socialism working. And it's market socialism. It's 21st century socialism. A lot of private companies, a lot of foreign investments, a lot of worker cooperatives, but it's a planned economy, right? And it's actually been quite successful. And that is the story of the USA pulling out of Vietnam. If you just focus on what happened in 1975 to 1980, they were still fighting, right? There was still a war going on at that point. They were fighting Cambodia. They were fighting China. It was a lot of chaos. But if you look at Vietnam from like 1980 to today, they've actually seen a really big increase, a really, really big increase in their standard of living. And I think that Vietnam is very closely related to the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. And I will tell you why. Because in 1979, when the USA established diplomatic relations with China, the USA was getting friendlier to a number of different communist governments at the time. The USA was friendly to Yugoslavia. The USA was friendly to Romania, to Poland. And there was a lot of different communist governments around the world that were having market reforms. Eventually, you had perestroika in the Soviet Union, but there were a number of communist governments in the world that were having market reforms. And the idea that the USA had, that the imperialists had, was we'll do market reforms, and these countries will see how great capitalism is, and we'll give them investment, and they'll distance themselves from the Soviet Union, and as a result, we'll overthrow the Marxist-Leninist ruling party. And it worked. It worked in Romania, and it worked in Czechoslovakia, and it worked in Poland. And they assumed it would work in China. And then in the mid-'80s, Vietnam started doing the same thing. It started having market reforms, and they thought it'll work in Vietnam. We'll just get some foreign investment in there, and communism will be overthrown, and they'll adopt the Western system, and it'll just be like the fall of the Soviet Union. We can loot the place. There you go. 1989 rolled around. And in 1989, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, the various communist governments of Eastern Europe fell. And in China, they had a really big attempt to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, the Tiananmen events of June of 1989. A bunch of protesters gathered in Tiananmen Square, and that's a whole nother thing. They've lied to us so much about that whole story. I've talked about that whole thing. I mean, that whole story is, there's so much malarkey we've been told about those events, but that's a whole nother stream. I can talk about that. But 1989, they tried to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. At the same time, they were overthrowing the communists in Romania and Czechoslovakia and all those places. But it didn't work. The Chinese Communist Party stayed in power. And actually, throughout the 1990s, China continued to get wealthier. And to this day, the Chinese Communist Party is much stronger than it was in 1989. In 1989, there were a lot of people in China that were pretty upset. But China continued on its course of socialist-oriented market economy, right? They call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. And now today, the Chinese Communist Party is very strong. China's the second largest economy in the world. Vietnam, again, they thought that 1989 or so, after they had their market reforms, the people in Vietnam would want freedom so bad, they would go out and they would overthrow the Communist Party of Vietnam. And that did not happen. And in fact, today, Vietnam has had an economic miracle. Vietnam's economy is very strong, and the Communist Party of Vietnam is actually stronger than it was in 1975. And while it worked very well in Asia, they brought down the Eastern Bloc. They eventually brought down the Soviet Union with perestroika, with market reforms. It doesn't work so well in Asia. And this is very interesting. It doesn't work so well in Asia. It's the opposite. The market reforms can tend to strengthen the communist government. They don't bring it down, they strengthen it. Now, there are various reasons that this is the case. Now, many people have pointed out that in Asia during the 1980s and 90s, there were a number, and still to this day, I mean, it's a little bit different, but in Asia in the 80s in particular, 70s, 80s, and 90s, you had the Asian tiger countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, right? And these are governments, states, regimes that were authoritarian military governments that used the military to build up a planned economy. Hong Kong, when it was a British protectorate, before it became rejoined with the Chinese mainland, Hong Kong was a similar story. Very authoritarian government, but it uses the military to build up a strong economy. In South Korea, Park Chung-hee, the military dictator, he built POSCO, the state-run steel industry. He built Samsung. the electronics manufacturer, and with the military and with government oversight, these Bonapartist regimes were able to build up very, very strong economies. And we're told in America, and this drives me up the wall, oh, the free market. See, these countries weren't communist. Look, South Korea, they used the free market. They did not use the free market, right? The South Korean military, Park Chung-hee, they built the corporation. They used tax money to do it. The military gave them a monopoly. No, POSCO, Samsung, Hyundai, the car company, these are not free market entities. These are government-controlled corporations that are controlled by the state as part of an economic plan made by a military dictatorship, right? South Korea was a military dictatorship up until the mid-'80s. That's why South Korea was very, very prosperous. And, the government on Taiwan, right? After the death of Chiang Kai-shek's son was in power. And again, very authoritarian, used the military, and he raised living standards pretty rapidly on the island of Taiwan. But it wasn't the free market and the wonders of the free market that did it. It was heavy state intervention. Singapore, still to this day, the government of Lee Kuan Yew is a very, very authoritarian government. And on top of that, it's very, very much a state-run economy. And I would argue these countries are capitalist in the sense their economy still functions according to profit, right? In Singapore, basically the country is run by 4 ruling families that share power, and the government facilitates them having kind of a state monopoly. And it's very much a government-controlled economy, but the government makes sure the profits flow into the hands of 4 ruling families, right? But you have these authoritarian, Bonapartist kind of military regimes, the Asian Tigers. But the reason that the Asian Tiger governments are so effective is that these countries, prior to having these governments come to power, they were feudal. It was feudalism, and out of feudalism, they industrialized. And because they industrialized, but they had been feudal before, and then they kind of went directly to a market economy after feudalism, and then that market economy gave rise to a very strong Bonapartist regime. That was because the culture of Singapore and Taiwan and South Korea was very much still a feudal culture, right? A feudal culture, the idea of having a king or a leader who controls the economy and stabilizes the economy in order to make sure that wealth, that fits, right? So, you didn't have capitalism arising kind of naturally out of feudalism. You had one day their feudalism, and then kind of artificially they become a market economy, and then a population of people that are socialized in feudalism, still have very feudal traditions, suddenly is living under a capitalist economy, but they have a government that arises that starts functioning almost in the manner of feudalism. And that's why you have these strong Bonapartist regimes. And you can argue that the reason that the Vietnamese Communist Party was not toppled, the reason the Chinese Communist Party was not toppled, was that prior to the rise of the Communist Party, prior to the rise of the Communist Party in Vietnam and in China, these countries were feudal, and they were not capitalist, right? They were largely feudal. And as a result, the population had a particular loyalty and a feeling of obligation to the state, right? That is different, right? The Confucianism, they talk about the great relationships and how, the people, the subject-object relationship. The people have an obligation to their government. The government has an obligation to the people. The teacher has an obligation to the student. The student has an obligation to the teacher. The parent has an obligation to the child. The child has an obligation to the parent. Filial piety. All of that. The culture was not one that, we're starting to have foreign investment and, let's go out and riot and overthrow our country. It's not like that, right? There's an emphasis on stability. There's an emphasis on subject-object relationship, and that culturally, the color revolution thing was a lot harder to pull off in Asian culture than in Eastern Europe. And that they were able to do the color revolution thing in Eastern Europe. They weren't able to do it in Asia. So what does all this have to do with the Korean Peninsula? Well, as you can see, one of the big achievements of Donald Trump in his first term was he became the first president of the United States while in office to visit North Korea. Bill Clinton has been to North Korea, but after he left office, right? But Donald Trump is the first president of the United States who went to North Korea while he was president. And that was a big deal. And that Donald Trump said, look, I want to improve U.S. relationships with North Korea. I want to improve relations. And Donald Trump went there. And it seemed like there were a lot of people in his administration who were big supporters of it. Tulsi Gabbard, for example, was a big supporter of him doing that. She was a Democrat at that time. She's now his intelligence director. However, when Donald Trump went to North Korea, he was accompanied by Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. Now, John Bolton is currently facing criminal charges for selling secrets to U.S. allies, right? He's indicted. He turned against Trump very quickly. Mike Pompeo has also turned against Trump, but not as strongly. He didn't turn against Trump until after Trump had left office. And he's still kind of a Republican. Sometimes he'll say good things about Trump. He's not where John Bolton is, but both of them were not really Trump's friends. And both of them stabbed Trump in the back one way or another. John Bolton a lot harder than Mike Pompeo, but they're still both, people that stabbed Trump in the back. And it's very clear that they were undermining Donald Trump's efforts to make peace with North Korea. They were undermining that process. Why? Why were they undermining it? And well, I guess first, how did they undermine it? First of all, John Bolton, when Donald Trump went to North Korea, John Bolton said Libyan options are on the table. We all know what happened in Libya, right? We all know that Gaddafi ended up getting killed. U.S. reconciliation with Libya under Obama did not end well. And so if you announce when you're trying to reconcile with a country and improve relations, we might be doing what we were doing in Libya, that didn't end too well. That was the first thing. Then, shortly after the meetings between Trump and Kim Jong-un started, the Spanish North Korean embassy, the embassy of North Korea in Spain, was raided. All kinds of people went into the embassy, stole computers, vandalized the place, and it was all over Spanish media, got no attention here. But that the individuals who raided the North Korean embassy in Spain were all Americans. They were CIA-linked individuals. And it was basically the CIA invaded. That's an act of war. If you invade a country's embassy, that's an act of war against that country. And so at the same time, the USA is trying to negotiate with North Korea. A bunch of CIA people engaged in a raid, an act of war against the North Korean embassy in Spain. And it was clear that the deep state was trying to undermine the reconciliation between the USA and North Korea. Why? Why was that? Well, the reason was that that apparently what was going on at the time was that there was a fear on the part of some within the intelligence community that if the USA were to enable North Korea to have a reform and opening up, which is what Kim Jong-un wants to do. He wants to bring in foreign investment, that it would not lead to the overthrow of the Korean Workers' Party, that the Korean Workers' Party would get stronger as a result. And I think that's true. I think that, the people of North Korea are not going to overthrow the Korean Workers' Party just because a bunch of foreign investment comes in. If anything, they're going to say, good one, Kim Jong-un, you got us a bunch of foreign investment. And, North Korea is an economic powerhouse just waiting to happen, right? Most North Koreans, the overwhelming majority of people in North Korea can speak more than one language. Those mountains are full of of minerals. They're also, North Korea already makes its own cell phones in-house. They have a huge manufacturing capacity. They've got beaches, they've got mountains. North Korea is just waiting to open up. And it's going to be a bonanza. It's going to be a field day when North Korea opens up. And on top of that, North Korea opening up will not only lead to a lot of money being made and the living standard of people in North Korea going up and a lot of other people making money, it's also going to lead to North Korea having much more of an audience, right? Right now, the U.S. deep state is furious about RT. Oh, my goodness. RT, that can't exist. We can't have RT. They're furious about CGTN, CCTV from China. Oh, my gosh, we can't have this. They're furious about Press TV. Oh, my God, we can't have Press TV from Iran. Imagine if there was a North Korean version of RT, a North Korean version of CCTV, a North Korean version of Press TV. Now, that is something that the U.S. government, the deep state in particular, the CIA that handles propaganda and Project Mockingbird and all that, they really don't want the idea of a North Korean RT, a North Korean press TV scares the bejesus out of them, right? Because North Korea has not forgotten that the United States killed 4 million of their people in the Korean War. North Korea has not forgotten that during the 1990s, there was a crisis of malnutrition imposed on them by the United States, by the sanctions. North Korea has the Juche ideology, which is, it's their interpretation of Marxism, Leninism applied to the Korean Peninsula, self-reliance and all of that. And North Korea, if they were to spread their ideology around the world, they would do so in a way that would really boost opposition to U.S. foreign policy, opposition to market liberalization. And North Korea, look, North Korea built a beautiful statue, the monument to African Renaissance in Senegal. I will put it on the screen. It's one of my most favorite images. Is this image of this? The government of Senegal hired North Korea to build their monument to commemorate their independence. And North Korea did an amazing job. It's an amazing monument. I will put it on the screen. The Monument of African Renaissance. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of art I've ever seen, right? North Korea built this in Africa, in Senegal. Look at that, right? You've got a father, you got a little baby, you've got a mother, the wife, the mother. It's beautiful. It is celebrating natalism and having children. It is celebrating physical fitness. It is celebrating strong families. And it is amazing. It's celebrating humanity. This is just a really, really amazing work of art, right? It's really amazing. And it's amazing. North Korea, they're Asians, but they built like an epic Black Power monument in Senegal, right? This is about the African people building themselves up. Kinkle is right. It is celebrating the future. It is just a beautiful, beautiful piece of art. And it's a slap in the face to the synthetic left. Why? The synthetic left doesn't want people in Africa to have children, right? They are furious about overpopulation, right? That's what, Jane Goodall and, the British Empire and the World Economic Forum. Oh my gosh, we can't have, African people breeding. We can't have it. No. That's what they're furious about, right? And it's a slap in the face to the environmental Malthusian synthetic left. It's a slap in the face to the imperialists and the colonizers. It is a Black Power monument. North Korea built that. North Korea, they have given weapons and support to the Palestinians. They even threatened to use their nukes to defend Greta Thunberg. I don't know if you saw that. When Greta Thunberg was giving aid to the Palestinians, she was arrested by the Israelis. The North Koreans said that if anything happens to Greta, we will nuke you. We will use our nuclear arsenal to protect, Greta Thunberg and her mission to Gaza. Right? North Korea supported Nelson Mandela. North Korea supported the Black Panthers of the United States. They were given financial backing from North Korea. Eldridge Cleaver even lived in North Korea for a couple of years. One of Eldridge Cleaver's daughters was born in North Korea. Years ago, I was in a communist group, the Workers' World Party, and in their office, they had the complete works of Kim Il-sung, big set of volumes. And I said, how did you get them? And they said, well, when the Black Panther Party of Detroit, when their office closed down, we found the complete works of Kim Il-sung outside on the street. And instead of having them be taken to the garbage, we took them to our office. That's how much North Korea and the Black Panthers were ideologically tied to each other. In fact, of all the communist governments in the world, the North Koreans were probably the closest to the Black Panthers. Little interesting story there, right? And that Eldridge Cleaver actually published his own edition of Kim Il-sung's writings on the Juche ideology. North Korea and the Black Panthers were very close. North Korea is currently supporting Burkina Faso. Robert Mugabe's private security guards were North Koreans, right? He had, instead of having Zimbabwean Secret Service protect him, he had North Korean bodyguards. Robert Mugabe, the leader of Zimbabwe. North Korea is very, very much an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial country. That is just who they are, right? They are born in anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolution. That's just what They are. And there is a fear on the part of Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and a lot of people in the CIA that if North Korea has a reform and opening up, the result is the Korean Workers' Party will get stronger. The result is the ideology, the anti-imperialist, anti-colonial ideology of North Korea will spread throughout the world. And that really, really scares and upsets them. That's what they're afraid of. That's what they are afraid of. I mean, it's that simple. And so they're trying to stop it at all costs. And I want to talk about another topic tonight, just because, right? So for those of you who are not aware, right? I was part of organizing a very, very, very important demonstration that happened in Times Square last Sunday, not yesterday, but a week ago, right? And it was a very, very important demonstration to support Dr. Hak Jahan. Now, who is Dr. Hak Jahan? Dr. Hak Jahan is the mother of peace, Holy Mother Han, Hak Jahan, sometimes called Hak Jahan Moon. She is the leader of the unification movement, right? The Unification Church, the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. She's the leader of a religious group that started in South Korea during the 1950s, was very, very anti-communist. She was born in North Korea along with her late husband. They both fled North Korea, very anti-communist. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, she and her late husband, they decided that they needed to go to North Korea. And in fact, her late husband, the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, he said that there will not be military reunification of North and South Korea. Fascinating. Even though he was tortured by Kim Il-sung, he was turned in, he was arrested in North Korea. The other Christians didn't like him. It's an interesting story. Reverend Moon was in North Korea. He's from there, and he was running his church. And there were Christians at the time that were part of the government in North Korea. They were pretty friendly to Christians in the early 50s before the Korean War. It was like, there was kind of a crackdown on Christians in the 60s, but in the late 40s, they had like Presbyterian ministers that were on the national committee and stuff like that. And during these years, he was operating in North Korea, and other Christians didn't like him. Right? And it was other Christians who lied to the North Korean officials and had Reverend Moon arrested and imprisoned. It was actually other Christians. That's an interesting detail. I did not know that, but it was other Christians who didn't like him. They lied to the North Korean government, made it sound like he was their enemy. So he was arrested. He was taken to jail. He was tortured, a whole horrible thing. He ended up escaping during the Korean War, going back to South Korea. Very anti-communist because he experienced some pretty horrendous conditions in the prison camp he was held in. Was tortured, pretty awful. So he was a strong, strong anti-communist all throughout the Cold War. But then in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, he said, Korea will not be unified militarily. The only way North and South Korea are going to reunify is with reconciliation and forgiveness. It's very interesting, very, very interesting ideas, right? So, their theology, the unification theology, teaches that that Cain and Abel, right? If you go to the Old Testament of the Bible, Adam and Eve, they had two children, Cain and Abel. And the story goes that, that Abel presented his offering to God, and God was very pleased with his offering. And Cain presented his offering to God, and God rejected it. And Cain felt very humiliated, very ashamed that his offering was rejected. And Abel was very boastful and prideful and thought he was better because God accepted his offering. So Cain, you know what? He got angry and he killed Abel, right? And then the story goes, God came to Cain and said, Cain, where is Abel? And he lied to God. And Cain said, am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? This sarcastic thing, like, why are you asking me? And that's a quote that people use often, right? Is that Cain was saying, why should I care what my brother's doing? It's not my job to look after my brother, when everybody knows he killed his brother. And that was the beginning of discord and war in the world, when Cain killed Abel, right? And and this is interesting. They have a unique interpretation of the story of Cain and Abel, which is the unification movement argues that there was fault on both sides. Obviously, we look at this and we say Cain is the bad one, right? He murdered his brother. But Abel kind of provoked it, right? Abel, instead of helping his brother Cain get stuff in order to be accepted by God, Cain, his offering was rejected, and Abel looked down upon his brother and was boastful and was arrogant, and his brother was hurt and was full of shame. And he didn't sympathize with his brother. He gloated over his brother. He appreciated it. So in jealousy, Cain killed his brother Abel. Now, obviously, Cain should not have done that, but Abel shouldn't have done that either. Abel and Cain should have worked together, right? That is the unification interpretation of the story. That's how Dr. Hak Jahan and Reverend Moon interpret the story of Cain and Abel, right? And they argue that that was the beginning of conflict in the world. And they argue the world is divided between Cain and Abel nations. And their feeling is that North Korea is Cain, South Korea is Abel, and that Cain and Abel should reconcile, and that North Korea and South Korea should reconcile, and that there's blame on both sides. That South Korea, they tend to take the South Korean side. They tend to be very anti-communist, but there is blame on both sides, and that Cain and Abel should reconcile. And so that's why after the fall of the Soviet Union, Reverend Moon said, nope. There's not going to be military. There's not going to be a military reunification of Korea. It's going to come by Cain and Abel forgiving each other. That's what he said. And so as a result of that, Reverend Moon got on a plane and he went to North Korea and he hugged Kim Il-sung and said, "You tortured me, you imprisoned me, but I forgive you." And ever since then, the unification movement have been huge supporters of North Korea. Now, they don't agree with North Korea's ideology, but they have invested millions and millions of dollars into the North Korean economy. They built the North Korean state-run car manufacturer. The Tongil Group has invested millions of dollars, built a park, built a big apartment building, built a church. They have invested millions of dollars in North Korea. And that's a really big deal because North Korea, after the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, was completely isolated, right? They couldn't import oil. They couldn't even get food into the country. But yet, because the unification movement was well connected in Washington, D.C., well connected in South Korea, they got a special exemption and they were able to bring millions of dollars into North Korea. And they are the primary advocates of peace with North Korea. They send delegations there. They have been the main advocates of peace with North Korea. And when Donald Trump visited North Korea in his first term, that was because of them, because they run the Washington Times, which is their newspaper, and their newspaper is one of the main conservative newspapers in Washington, D.C., and they convened academics and think tanks, and they basically put pressure on the Trump administration, made the case for it. Donald Trump would not have visited North Korea if it wasn't for Dr. Hak Jahan. Okay, that's just a fact, right? And you can choose not to believe me if you want. You can choose to say that's a bunch of malarkey, Caleb. Well, it's true. This woman, who right now is sitting in a jail cell in South Korea, is the woman who made Donald Trump visit North Korea. It is because of Dr. Hak Jahan that an American president met with Kim Jong-un once, met with Kim Jong-un twice, and then actually went to the 38th parallel, the DMZ, and walked into North Korea and met Kim Jong-un. If it wasn't for this 82-year-old woman who was born in North Korea, has every reason in the world to hate Kim Jong-un, to hate North Korea, to want to take revenge on them and kill them, if it wasn't for this woman, who she and her husband forgave North Korea and said, in the name of our religion, in the name of bringing Cain and Abel together, we are going to invest millions of dollars of our own money into North Korea. We're going to spend our own money to help North Korea have cars, to build parks in North Korea. If it wasn't for them doing this, Donald Trump would never have been to visited North Korea. That is a huge accomplishment. It's a huge, huge thing. It is a tremendous, tremendous achievement. It is a tremendous achievement, and you cannot downplay that. And that people don't seem to understand how important this is, right? That the fact that this happened, I'll put the image on the screen. The fact that this moment in human history happened, where the leader of America and the leader of North Korea, two countries that are technically at war with each other, right? We have no diplomatic relations. There's no embassy here. There's never been a peace treaty. There's been an armistice with North Korea. The fact that these two world leaders, the head of state of the United States and the head of state of the Korean, Democratic People's Republic, could meet and shake hands, that an American sitting president could go to North Korea, that would never have happened if it wasn't for this woman. And that's why I have said this woman should not be in jail. And this woman, who has made such a tremendous contribution to world peace, and who is the best friend that North Korea has, she should not be in jail. And I think that's a respectable position. And right now she's sitting in jail, and she's going to go to trial on December 1st. And she will be going to trial December 1st on charges of bribery. Now, I've heard a lot of different things, and I know the White House has a relationship with her, obviously. And, she is sitting in a jail cell right now, charged with bribery, because somebody who used to work for her allegedly gave a handbag to the first lady of the previous president of South Korea. And so this 82-year-old woman who just had heart surgery, is sitting in a jail cell right now. They let her out for 3 days to go to the hospital. Now she's back in the jail cell. December 1st, she will go to trial. And Newt Gingrich is already in South Korea raising a ruckus. He's a Republican, a conservative. Ministers from all over the world are raising a ruckus. So in New York City, on Sunday, Center for Political Innovation, we were happy to join with the American Christian Leadership Conference, the Association of Christian Evangelists, and other organizations. We marched in Times Square to support this woman. And if you can't understand why we would do this, as people that are anti-imperialists, as somebody who's got the complete works, or not the complete works, but a lot of Kim Il-sung books on my shelf, as somebody who has met with the North Koreans in Ecuador and at World Youth Festivals, as somebody who's been marching in support of North Korea for a long time, as somebody who considers himself in line with anti-imperialism and the tradition of anti-imperialism that North Korea stands for, I think you can understand why we joined this demonstration. I think it should really make perfect sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense to you, but if it doesn't make sense to you, you really don't know who I am, right? I think it makes perfect sense why I was supporting this gathering in Times Square. And here's the video, right? And here's the video. I'll just show you the video of the rally, and then I want to talk to you about something else. So here we go.
Are standing up against religious persecution. Our Holy Mother Han is persecuted so much.
So we're here at the church, just kind of getting everybody ready. We got a sign here. She is innocent, with Hak Jahan Moon on it. Ready to go do something, huh? That's right. That's right.
Release the Mother of Peace. Release the Mother of Peace. Release the Mother of Peace.
Since the age of 16, and when he started to work for peace, when so many people at the age of 20 don't even know what to do in life.
So we're here in Times Square to support the Holy Mother Han. Holy Mother Han is the founder of the Women's Federation for World Peace International that has an NGO in the United Nations. And she's also the great leader of Family Federation for World Peace and Unification.
God, we love you, Mother. We love you, Mother. We love you, Mother. We love you, Mother.
But they're bringing up these same ideas, these same charges. They're thinking it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. It's all trumped up. What we're asking for is to let our true mother out of jail until and unless she's found guilty in a court of law, which This never happened because she didn't do anything wrong.
She traveled the world. She went to Africa, where I am from. She went to the very corners of Africa to pray for Africans.
And she's been persecuted in Korea because of her religious affiliation, and we're here to support her because she's innocent and we want her to be released.
Hallelujah! 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 We are with you, Holy Mother! We are with you, Holy Mother! We are with you, Holy Mother! We are with you, Holy Mother!
I hope we can overcome this kind of situation because of Holy Mount Han always be with us, and Heavenly Parents also work together, and watch us.
Koreans need to really demonstrate that heart of filial piety, and it has always been in the South Korean culture, the culture of filial piety, the culture of Hyojong, the respect of the elders for generations, for millennia. South Korea has been known as that. And today, what is happening is really different.
We're out here because we support this global campaign. We know how important Dr. Akjeon has been in the effort to bring reconciliation between the United States and North Korea. And her family, her late husband, and herself, they have invested so much money into North Korea. They have visited North Korea and met with Kim Il-sung.
Release the Mother of Peace. Release the Mother of Peace. Release the Mother of Peace.
Thank you.
Release the Mother of Peace. Release the Mother of Peace. Release the Mother of Peace.
She's the one who really brought, the peace road to connect the entire world.
She traveled around the world in order to reach out to the corners of the world to promote peace and family.
We remember ancient Rome at the time of Jesus. Ancient Rome was mighty in power. Rome's army subdued many nations, and Rome was so powerful. But what did the Romans do? They persecuted Christianity, like what's happening in South Korea now. They're persecuting Holy Mother Han and our church, Unification Church, Family Federation. Rome's mighty army was so powerful, but what happened? Rome fell. Rome burned because Rome persecuted Christians. Ancient Rome persecuted Christians, and Rome fell. Rome burned. And what's happening in South Korea? They are persecuting our Holy Mother Han, whom our heavenly parents sent. After 6,000 years, they are persecuting her in South Korea.
The movement is being persecuted around the world, and this shouldn't be happening. We are in full support of the call to release the Mother of Peace. Dr. Akjeon is an important ally of all who want peace in the world, and especially those who want peace on the Korean Peninsula and peace with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Release the Mother of Peace! 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 Now! Release the Mother of Peace! Now!
Took the cross of the world, she took the cross of humanity to really want to bring a peace. That's why we call her the Mother of Peace. No woman ever on this earth had ever been able to do that. She is the one who really restored the position of Eve. Eve who even fell in the Garden of Eden.
Now! Release the Mother of Peace! Now! Now! Release the Mother of Peace! Release the Mother of Peace! Release the Mother of Peace! Now! Release the Mother of Peace!
So I want to then talk about something else, which is kind of a bummer. But, it has to put this in context, right? So right now, the woman who made this happen is sitting in a jail cell. I mean, if that's not a bummer enough, I have to tell you right now, North Korea's friends in America have stabbed them in the back. Let me say that again. North Korea's friends in America have stabbed them in the back. For the longest time, who was the biggest friend of North Korea in America? The Communist Party. The Communist Party USA, led by Gus Hall. Gus Hall would go to North Korea all the time. Gus Hall, they, printed, writings about North Korea, Kim Il-sung's writings, whatever. However, in 2010, Gus Hall, the leader of the Communist Party, died in the year 2000. 10 years later, 2010, Obama was president. North Korea tested nuclear weapons. And at that point, the People's World, which is the daily newspaper of the Communist Party USA, it was People's Weekly World for a while, and then they just made it an online publication rather than a print publication. It was the People's World. They ran an op-ed, which is not on there anymore. It's been scrubbed. And the op-ed is called North Korea, and then in all capital letters, no way to act, denouncing North Korea for developing nuclear weapons. And at that point, the Communist Party of the United States terminated its relationship with North Korea. Dan Margolis, who was a leader of the Communist Party back then, I don't think he's in the Communist Party anymore. A guy named Dan Margolis, excuse me, he was the main liaison of the Communist Party USA to North Korea. Let me Google him. Dan Margolis. I think he's, if I can find a picture of him, this guy. Right, this guy, Dan Margolis, was the main representative of the Communist Party USA who would visit the North Korean mission to the United Nations. And he would visit them, and he was their main liaison. And he would show up, a couple times a year. The North Korean mission to the United Nations has a reception where they invite their different friends, and they would invite Dan Margolis. This guy, he was their guy, right? And after 2010, Dan Margolis wrote this article, North Korea, no way to act. And from then on, the Communist Party USA stopped supporting North Korea. And to this day, the Communist Party USA does not support North Korea. Think about that, right? North Korea is a communist country, and the Communist Party USA does not support them. And I used to be in the Workers' World Party. The Workers' World Party still supports North Korea. And there is a group of Korean Americans called Nodatol, and they support North Korea. But I got to point something out, which is, what president of the United States is that? All right, is that Joe Biden? Wait, that's Kamala Harris, right? No. That's Obama. No, that's Trump. What president improved relations with North Korea and took steps in that direction? That would be Donald Trump. And North Korea knew that Trump was going to improve relations before he even took office. In fact, when I asked Donald Trump a question at a press conference in 2016, the one time Trump and I have spoken, I was at a press conference in March of 2016 at the old post office in Washington, D.C., and I raised my hand, and he said, "Who's my favorite reporter?" You. He called on me. And I asked Donald Trump about Russia. He responded, and in his response, he started talking about how the USA shouldn't have troops in South Korea. And he said, "Half my TVs are made in South Korea. Why are we giving them support? It's none of our business." And North Korea, in official state media, actually said that they were excited about Trump. And in the last election, in the 2020 election, the 2024 election, they said the same thing. They said under Trump, there is a possibility of improving relations, right? That's what they said. And Donald Trump, despite whatever criticism, flaws, I was just on here talking about ICE, and there's plenty of bad things you can say about Trump. But under Trump, the North Koreans understand that there is hope for improving relations. This is somebody they're willing to meet with and talk to. So there's that. That's kind of important, isn't it? Now, both the Workers' World Party and the No to Tall organization have Trump derangement syndrome. In fact, No to Tall, they did not march in the streets to celebrate when Trump was elected and say, great, now we can have peace on the Korean Peninsula. They did the opposite. They joined with the Answer Coalition to have a hysterical Stop Trump rally. And the Workers' World Party did the same thing when Trump was first elected in 2016. Even though North Korea was saying, this is good, we might be able to talk to Trump, the Workers' World Party joined the hysterical Stop Trump rally when Trump took office in 2016, a rally that turned very violent, that, destroyed a lot of cars and was just absolutely horrible. All right. And even though North Korea says this guy is who we want in office, this guy's who we want to talk to, North Korea's friends in America that are communists have Trump derangement syndrome because they don't really support North Korea. They support the Democrats. Let me reemphasize that. They don't really support North Korea. They support the Democrats. And because of that, they're not really friends of North Korea. And, when the South Korean president came to the United States 3 years ago, CPI reached out to No to Tall, the Korean American organization that was planning a demonstration against Donald Trump, or against, not against Trump, but against the South Korean president. We said, can we come to your rally? Can we come to your rally? And they sent us a really nasty email. They didn't just say no. Let me put it that way. They repeated all kinds of really nasty personal gossip against me. And on top of that, they said they don't support Trump. Right. And that they were especially concerned that we would be supporting Trump. Well, Trump is who's meeting with Kim Jong-un in that picture. And that right there is proof that No to Tall is not really a friend of the Korean people. No to Tall is actually just a woke intelligence operation. And in fact, what No to Tall exists to do, they don't exist to actually help North Korea. Their goal is to get gay pride parades into North Korea. Their goal is to get woke politics into North Korea. Their goal is to interfere in North Korea, right? Yeah. And, so you look at this whole situation and you see that, North Korea's closest friend and ally is sitting in a jail cell. And you see that all the communist groups have betrayed North Korea. And even the couple communist groups that still support North Korea don't really support North Korea because they have Trump derangement syndrome, which anyone, if you support North Korea, you would not have Trump derangement syndrome. That right there should tell you why an organization like the Center for Political Innovation is so important. We are a very, very important organization. When Donald Trump came to Madison Square Garden to give his speech the last week of the 2024 election, we were out in front of it with a big banner of Trump and Kim shaking hands. This is us.
So we're here on 34th Street, and the crowds have lined up. They're going in to see Trump speak. We've got our banner. We're handing out our palm cards, spreading the message.
Like a concert, but bigger. I see the lines of people going block after block after block after block, and it makes you wonder, is the media, the mainstream media, really telling you the truth about how unpopular Donald Trump actually is?
This administration is evil, and we need to bring America back and make America godly again. Make America great again.
Only peace can make America great again. Only peace can make America great again. This was a great, great moment when Trump talked to Kim Jong-un and started the process of peace on the Korean Peninsula. And we want to see peace not just with North Korea, but with Russia, with China, with many countries around the world. It is outrageous that billions of dollars is being spent on prolonging the war in Ukraine when our people can't get relief in North Carolina. People are left behind in Georgia and North Carolina. They can't get the relief they need. This is outrageous. Our government is more concerned with waging wars around the world than for caring for our own people. And we need a president who will put America first, a president who will bring peace around the world. Only peace can make America great again.
Yeah, and that even got us mentioned in New Yorker magazine, believe it or not. New Yorker magazine featured us, that we were there. And I was quoted in New Yorker magazine. Who are North Korea's real friends? Who are North Korea's real friends? You think about it. Is it Know-it-all that is having hysterical anti-Trump rallies and won't even let us go to their rallies supposedly to support North Korea because, they are part of the character assassination operation against me, and because they don't like Trump? Who is North Korea's real friend? Who's North Korea's real friend? I mean, you have to ask that question, right? North Korea's real friend is sitting in a jail cell right now in South Korea. And I'm organizing rallies with other people, helping to try and raise awareness about why she needs to be released. And, I can't emphasize this enough. CPI is a really, really, really important organization, because if it wasn't for us, who would be doing this? We were all over the country in the 2024 election. We even went to Trump's inauguration with a big banner that said, "Only peace can make America great again." That was our contribution, right? Here's Briggy, right? This was our contribution. We had this at Trump Tower. We had this at the library, the New York Public Library. We had this in front of Madison Square Garden. We had this at Trump's inauguration. Who else would do this if not CPI? We are the only anti-imperialist left. We are the only ones, right? We're the only ones. If it hadn't been for Briggy and Phil and Irving and Noah, hadn't been for my good friend Michael, Red Illuminati, if it hadn't been for other people who helped us, people from Manhattan Family Church, this message wouldn't have been part of the election conversation in 2024. This message wouldn't have been at Trump's inauguration. It wouldn't have been in front of Madison Square Garden. Who is North Korea's real friends? People that are rioting against Trump when Trump is the one who North Korea says they like, or us? Think about it. And if you can understand why it's important that the Center for Political Innovation exists, I think you need to think about this and understand why the work we do is so important. We're not an online organization. There's a lot of podcasts you can listen to, a lot of streams you can watch and all of that. We are building an in real life organization. If all this ever becomes for you is a form of internet entertainment, eventually you're going to change the channel. And I mean, that's, you don't watch the same TV show. And if all this is to you is a TV show, you will change the channel. I don't want you to change the channel. I want you to do what Briggy's doing here, right? Briggy is a member of the group who's been part of the organization, and she's not going to change the channel because she has become part of this community. It's not a show she watches. It's real life. And that's what CPI is. This is not a show. This is real life. We urgently need an anti-imperialist movement in America right now. And we don't need a podcast, and we don't need a show. We need a real anti-imperialist movement. And there's a lot of people right now that are lost, that this society, this country has left behind. They're confused. They don't know what to believe in. They urgently need a movement. And around the world, there's many people suffering under the boot heels of U.S. imperialism who urgently need a movement. And there are people like the Uhuru movement who are being oppressed by the American government and attacked by the feds. And there are people around the world. And what we are doing as CPI is really, really, really important. And no one else is doing it. And I don't care if somebody else is cool on the internet. And I don't care if you're mad about this or that, or you think I'm a nerd or whatever you think about me. We're doing it. And nobody else is. Nobody else is. There's other people that are doing important stuff, right? The Uhuru movement does important work in the Black community. Jose is running a great campaign for office right now. Good for him. But we are doing stuff like this, and nobody else is. And it's really, 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 really important that we do stuff like this. So I would like you to join the Center for Political Innovation and get involved. I would like you to, support us if you can, financially or however you can. I'd like you to become a member. We have got an important job to do, and we're doing it. And I would like you to be part of it. And I am trying to recruit you. I am trying to recruit you right now. I would like to recruit you to this movement because this movement is urgently needed. This movement is absolutely urgently needed. And there's nobody else doing what we're doing. We got to do it. I've been talking to a lot of people, lately, a lot of things have been happening. This was a wild day on many, many levels. A lot of crazy things happened today. All good things, though. It was like a lot of good things kind of lined up today. But one thing that happened is there's a friend of mine, shout out if you're watching, who reached out to me. Guy I hadn't heard from in a little while, but we recently reestablished contact. And he was telling me how much he was just horrified by the support for Aaron Bushnell on the left. And there's probably people in the chat who disagree with me about that. And that's fine. We there's going to be disagreements about things. But, Aaron Bushnell, the response to Aaron Bushnell's suicide by the left was abominable. It was utterly abominable, right? Now, I'm not saying the guy didn't, his heart really bled for the Palestinians. He was really horrified by what's going on, and I respect that. And he also he thought that he might have to go participate in it, which he could have gone to prison and become a conscientious objector. He could have tried to run away. He could have gone AWOL. He had other options, but in his mind, he had no choice but to go be part of it. Well, that was mental illness, and he committed suicide. And the guy had serious mental health problems, and he committed suicide in a very theatrical way. And it's a sad, horrific, sad thing when someone commits suicide. It's a horrible thing. But the absolute wrong thing to do was celebrate that. Why? Why was it the wrong thing to do to celebrate it? Because people who commit suicide often do it because they feel hopeless and they feel that that's the only way they can be remembered. That's the only way other people can hear their pain. It's people that are suicidal are not in touch with reality, and they're in a huge amount of emotional pain. And when Aaron Bushnell killed himself, and then social media exploded with people saying, "Oh my God, it was so amazing what he did," that killed people. I can guarantee you there's probably at least 10 or 20 people who died because that happened, who would not have died, right? If they had been feeling depressed, they'd been feeling suicidal, but then they'd never heard of Aaron Bushnell. They had just, gotten the help they need, they would still be alive today. There are people, though, that were thinking about killing themselves. They were depressed. They were suicidal. And then Aaron Bushnell, look, this guy killed himself. Look, everyone's sympathizing with him. They're celebrating him. They think he's a hero. And you can bet there are people that went and killed themselves because of that. That is so wrong. It's not ethical. I work in television. And one rule in television is that if somebody kills themselves, you cannot do a story on it. Did you know that? You are not allowed. If somebody jumps off a bridge, if somebody, no matter what, if someone commits suicide, you cannot talk about it in television. You cannot write a news report about it for the newspaper. It's the first thing they teach you in journalism ethics, that you cannot report on suicide. Why? Because it is well documented. If someone kills themselves and it's on TV, the next day 2 or 3 people kill themselves because they saw it on TV, right? And it's part of how mental illness works. The mental illness that leads one to commit suicide is encouraged by media coverage of suicide, right? And is it right? Is it wrong? I don't care. It's just a fact. If someone kills themselves and it's all over television, people kill themselves, right? That's just how it works. And this Aaron Bushnell guy, again, I'm glad that he sympathized with the Palestinians. I'm glad he had empathy for them, but he didn't have to kill himself. And I don't even really blame him necessarily, because he was so mentally ill that he killed himself. So I don't think he can be held responsible for his actions. But I do absolutely blame Brian Becker. Brian Becker, the leader of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, went out of his way to write a special letter, not from PSL, not from Answer, but from Brian Becker. And I got it. I'm not even a member of PSL, and it comes in my inbox. I didn't know who Aaron Bushnell was. The first thing I get, special message from Brian Becker, Aaron Bushnell. And it's all about how Brian Becker loves Aaron Bushnell. Brian Becker thinks it's amazing. And I looked at that and I fumed with anger. And I fumed with anger because I know something or two about the PSL. Okay? I've been around leftist circles, and, you know, mental health is a problem among young people everywhere in this country right now. Right? The suicide rate is much higher than it's been in previous generations. There's a big problem with mental health, right? These phones are not good for young folks. Not good for anybody, really. And we've already got that. And also, if anyone has ever been around PSL, if you think there's mental health issues among the masses, wait till you hang out with PSL, right? I mean, Google PSL, boyfriend, Party for Socialism and Liberation, boyfriend, and see what comes up. Google Party for Socialism and Liberation, abuse. Google, the group is full of people with mental health issues, all right? And Brian's got to know that. He's the leader of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So as the leader of an organization full of 19 and 20-year-olds, many of whom has mental health issues, Brian Becker decided to use his platform, to use his position as the respected leader, to announce to everybody that he thought a suicide was awesome. Now, you want to talk about irresponsible leadership. You want to talk about somebody who does not care about the young people in his organization. You want to talk about somebody who is utterly unconcerned with how their behavior affects others. Utterly, I mean, that is like a sociopathic move for him to do that. For him, as the leader of a communist group that has a lot of 19 and 20-year-olds in it, to go out of his way to announce to the world how much he loves a suicide. He's basically admitting he doesn't care about the young people in his group. He doesn't care about them. He's not concerned about their mental health. He's not concerned about it. And it's infuriating, but he wasn't the only one. All the communist groups did this, right? And, you know, like, there's like basic things, basic principles, right? Left adventurism, right? That's not the answer. You build a mass movement. Some guy lighting himself on fire is not going to change the world. We need to build a mass movement. Some isolated assassination, some bomb. We oppose terrorism, individual terror. You know, this happened during the Vietnam War. There was a guy who lit himself on fire. And at the time, all the communist groups said, that's very sad. And the guy was a Quaker. He was a Quaker, a religious guy. And at the time, right, the Communist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, all of them said, this is very sad that this Quaker guy did this. But we don't support this. You know, we don't think it's the right thing to support it. We need a mass movement. That was the message. That was the message of the communist parties, the People's Daily, the People's Weekly World. That was the message of the Workers' World Party. That was the message of the Socialist Workers' Party, the Militant. They all said roughly the same thing, which is it's very sad that this Quaker man, felt so much for the Vietnamese people, was so outraged by the Vietnam War that he would light himself on fire and kill himself. It's very sad that he would do this. But it's still wrong. Like, that's not the answer. We don't promote that kind of thing. That was their response. But I guess now that's not the response. Now, the response of the communist groups was to celebrate what Aaron Bushnell did. That is unethical. It is absolutely unethical, right? It's absolutely unethical. You cannot celebrate suicide of anybody, right? You cannot do that, right? And to uphold that as an example, look, there was somebody who lit themselves on fire after one of Trump's court dates. And do you think that wasn't inspired by all the coverage around Aaron Bushnell? I mean, it's awful. It's absolutely awful, but it comes from a lack of empathy, a lack of empathy, a lack of concern. You know, and it was because Aaron Bushnell was going viral on social media. It was the trendy, hip, cool thing to do. You know, and I don't mean Palestinians here, right? Palestinians feeling this way is one thing, right? Palestinians are dying, they're being bombed, they say anything to make this stop. That's different. But for American leftist anti-war activists to promote what Aaron Bushnell did was beyond unethical. Beyond unethical. I've made mistakes in my life. I've made poor decisions. That is one mistake I will never make. And it is shocking to me to see how Brian Becker and others went out of their way to basically, you know, take action that would result in the death of many of the young people who look up to them. I mean, and whatever happened to responsibility? Luigi Mangione was a similar case, right? We don't support left adventurism, but it was cool on the internet. It was cool on the internet that people have lost their sense of ethics, right? What is right is not always popular. What is popular is not always right, right? And it may have been popular to support and cheer for Aaron Bushnell because it would get you lots of likes and shares and it was going viral online, but it was still wrong. And it may be popular on social media to cheer for Luigi Mangione, but it's wrong. And that suicide is wrong and it is a big problem and mental health is a serious issue and you just shouldn't do it. But yet the entire left was unanimous in saying, woo, Aaron Bushnell, yeah, we need more people to do something like that. Woo. I mean, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable to me. And the same with the Luigi Mangione case. Again, right? His individual terror and assassination, the answer to America's healthcare problem? No. The answer is building a mass movement. But that wasn't cool on the internet, was it? Right? Luigi is so good looking and all of it. I mean, it's frustrating to me. And if it wasn't for us, if it wasn't for CPI, who would be saying this? I wrote a book warning about the danger of an American years of lead. That's what my book is called. The Luigi Mangione case and the danger of an American years of lead. And I warned that the years of lead, you know, an escalation to, you know, extreme violence, that is a method for de-escalating and controlling and basically waging a counterinsurgency, right? Is that, you know, that in Italy, you know, they had all kinds of crazy left adventurous violence and terrorism. And as a result, Italy wasn't able to leave NATO, even though that's what the public wanted. Well, right now in America, they're threatening to attack Venezuela. 70% of Americans are opposed to bombing Venezuela. CBS News came out. 70% of Americans say don't bomb Venezuela. The American people are more anti-war than they've ever been. And the only way the establishment can prevent that overwhelming anti-war sentiment on the part of the American people from being put into practice is with a years of lead strategy. You got to read Frank Kitson. You got to read the books of the great counterinsurgency strategist William S. Lind. I quote them in my book on the Luigi Mangione case, right? This is my book, by the way, that I wrote on after they were celebrating the Luigi Mangione case. I wrote a book, The Danger of an American Years of Lead. This is my book. If it'll ever load. I don't know why it's taking so long. Here it is. Oh, it's going around. And oh, there it is. All right. The Danger of an American Years of Lead. That's my book. And in that book, I pointed out that the way counterinsurgency operations are waged in our time, they are waged this way, right? That William S. Lind says that the story of David and Goliath, has been told for 4,000 years. And has there ever been anybody anybody who heard the story of David and Goliath and sympathized with Goliath. No, right? Everyone who hears the story of David and Goliath sympathizes with David. And that the way insurgencies, like the Vietnamese, like the Algerians, the way that they're successful is that they capture that energy. Americans and human beings in general, we support the underdog, right? And that insurgents, they become the underdog, right? They become the underdog. Here's the book. They become the underdog, and we support the underdog. We support David against Goliath. And so the way to defeat an insurgency is what you do is you make it so it's not David versus Goliath. It's David versus the other David versus the other David versus the other David versus the other David. And Goliath, I mean, he might be big and strong, but he's just a nice guy. He's just sitting back. He's not doing anything. Who cares about Goliath, right? Goliath, he's a big friendly giant. He just sits there, you know, eating an apple and watching and saying, don't hurt each other there, Davids. You know, try not to hurt each other out there. And David fights David, and David fights the other David, and David fights the other David, and the Davids are beating the crap out of each other and hurting each other. And Goliath sits there and just says, oh boy, I hope nobody gets hurt too bad. Geez, you guys ought to de-escalate out there. And eventually the Davids beat each other up so bad that Goliath wins by default. That's how you wage an effective counterinsurgency. That's what you do, right? And that's what how the British defeated the Provisional IRA. The British military realized that every time the British military went out to fight the IRA surged in popularity. So what did they do? They formed Protestant counter gangs that went out and fought the IRA. And then the British government said, wow, Protestants and Catholics shouldn't be fighting each other, right? We don't need ethnic division. And then they funded Trotskyite organizations that fought against the IRA. And they said, wow, look at these extremists, these communists, the IRA communists are killing the Trotskyite communists, you know, and then they had the Vatican teamed up with the British, and they had these marches where Protestants and Catholics held hands, and they said, we want to just stop the killing. And meanwhile, then they funded drug gangs to fight the IRA. And so the IRA entered an alliance with other drug gangs to protect themselves. And they said, wow, drugs are not good. And, you know, drug gangs, why is the IRA getting involved in that? Drug gangs are awful. And you know, they were the big friendly giant just sitting back going, oh boy, why are all the Davids killing each other? You know, I mean, the IRA is fighting the Protestant gangs, and the Protestant gangs are fighting the IRA, and the drug gangs are fighting the IRA, and the IRA is now joining with drug gangs. That's awful. And oh man, that's horrible. And now we got the Trotskyite communist groups that are killing IRA people. Oh, it's so horrible. And like, can't we all just get along? And then the IRA surrendered. And that's how you got the Good Friday Agreement. It's a very effective strategy. If the population is solidly against you and you want to win by default, what you have to do is you have to make sure that the oppositional energy of the population is diffused and confused. You have to get the dissidents to attacking each other, to beat up on each other. You have to make it confusing so no one can tell who the real David is, and no one can. And pretty soon people, and you have to, the other thing, and this is an important thing, libertarians talk about this also, is that if you create a lot of instability and violence in society, people turn to the state for protection. And that's true, right? You know, there's an awful trend in the world today. It actually relates to one of the questions somebody sent in, but in countries where drug gangs are a big problem and such, in a lot of cases, police that are fighting drug gangs, police will become the heroes of the community for doing violent, illegal things. And that, part of the phenomenon of Bukele in El Salvador is that those drug gangs are so horrible that Bukele comes in there and he violates human rights left and right. He sets up these awful prisons. There's a lot of people that are saying, fine, just stop the drug gangs, and they accept it. Right? And if you create enough violence and instability and chaos in society, people will naturally start to tolerate and even ask for authoritarianism to deal with it. right? And that in Jamaica, there's been issues where, like, the police, the police come to a house, there's a drug dealer or something. The police come to the house and a crowd of people are like cheering for the police, to arrest the drug dealer. And the crowd starts egging on the police to shoot the guy in the head. And they finally just shoot him in the head and the crowd applauds. Things like that are happening around the world in developing countries because people are living under the terror of drug cartels, the terror of instability. And the state is the alternative. And, if you want to live in fascism, if you actually want to live in fascism, make sure that Luigi Mangione and Aaron Bushnell stuff starts happening regularly, and people will support fascism, right? If you want to live under Bukele, right? If you want to live under a government like that, make sure that Luigi Mangione and killing and assassinations and all of that is happening. And as a result, people will support authoritarianism, and that, those of us who want to build a socialist society, we're not trying to create chaos and instability. We're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to build a solid movement of people who are there for each other, people who care for each other, that are trying to improve things and trying to create a government of action that'll fight for working families. We're trying to build a network of people who can rely on each other and can get things done. That's what we're trying to do. We are not trying to create chaos. We are not trying to create instability. The old system is doing that. And we're offering a way out of the chaos, a way out of the instability. That's what we're offering. So those are just all my thoughts for tonight. I guess my opening remarks tonight took longer than usual, but that's what's been on my mind tonight. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Ryan in Kansas City. We got Irene in Brooklyn. We got Alex in Brazil. St. David's, Bermuda. Names and locations. We got Chance in Fort Acapella. All right. Neil Fraser in Hong Kong. Jenny in Cincinnati. Names and locations. We got David in San Jose. We got Rise from Adelaide, Australia. John in Florida. We got the South, Chicago. Happy Monday. Happy Monday. We got Bill in Tasmania. Rory from St. Louis. Welcome, Rory. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We got Rose in my cave. We got Phil in Brooklyn. Good to see you, brother Phil. We got John mopping from the future. All right, John. Good to see you. Anybody else? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Who is with us? Diana in Florida. Well, Phil says it's a great stream tonight. Well, thank you, Phil. I do appreciate that. Robert in New Jersey. Good to see you, sir. Karen in Berlin. Good to see you, Karen. All right. Why am I saluting people like I'm in the U.S. Navy? I don't know. Gabby sent a question via and send your question, Gabby. I appreciate it. We got Jalopy in North Carolina. Jalopy. We got Bradley in Los Angeles. We got DM Morph. Backwards. All right. Tijuana, Mexico. Very, very good. We got quite a crew here tonight. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Our community is growing. This channel is growing. Warning. Just FYI. Just telling you, if you like this channel, you got to subscribe. You got to hit the like button. You got to hit the notifications bell and expect to not get notifications, right? You just have to keep coming back and checking. People just don't get notified on this channel because we've been demonetized, because I'm probably being suppressed on about 20 different levels. I just had to have a big fight with Amazon to make sure they paid me for my books at the end of this month. They relented today. That's one of the exciting things that happened today is Amazon, I guess, will be paying me this month. Thank God. But it's been a long struggle. You never get notifications. Just got to come back and check. Just come back. Just come back regularly. I'm just telling you, you got to come back regularly. because there's a lot of people who don't want you to see this channel, and they've gone out of their way to do that. And we can't rely on social media. Social media is rigged. Social media is mind control. We're here, but our goal, again, my goal is to recruit you. I want you to join the Center for Political Innovation. I want you to get involved in an in real life community. That's what I want. So there we go. Now, if you got a question for the second half of our show, there are three ways. There are three ways that you can send in your questions for the second half of the show, which is you can send a Rumble rant on the Rumble. You can do what Gabby did. You can Cash App me at CalebMoppin22. But the best way, the absolute best way to send a question, buy me a coffee. Boom. Great way to send your question. Now, I will answer this question. Can we buy books directly? The answer to that question is all you need to do is go to your local bookstore. If you don't want to shop at Amazon, look, I get it. I hate Amazon, right? Amazon is it's a government sponsored monopoly. They're, I had to fight with them, absolutely. So, if you don't want to go to Amazon, all you need to do, go to the Amazon page of my books and find the ISBN, the International Seller of Books number. Get that number and go to your local bookstore and say, I want book ISBN number, and give them the number, right? You can tell them my name also. You can tell them the title of the book, but the best, you give them the ISBN, there's no way to miss it. And then they can order it because it has wider distribution. It's not only on Amazon. So any bookstore, I used to work in a bookstore. That was my first job, as I worked in a bookstore in my little town of Orrville, Ohio. There was a little bookstore. I think it's closed down. It was called Books, Etc. I used to work at Books, Etc. My boss was Charles. Charles was my boss. Charles owned a chain of health food stores in Pennsylvania, and he had started a little bookstore. I guess the bookstore was about to close, and he bought the little bookstore. And for like a year, I think, I worked at Books, Etc. And I learned that you can order any book at a bookstore as long as it's in distribution. You just need the ISBN. So if you don't want to buy the book from Amazon, which I totally respect that, write down the ISBN, go to Amazon, pull the book up, and look for the International Seller of Books number, the ISBN, write it down, take it to your local bookstore and say, I want book ISBN number, and then read off the number, and they'll get it for you. That's how it works. That's generally how it works. Is if it has an ISBN, a bookstore can give it to you, can sell it to you. And hey, I'm being nice tonight and just answering other questions. I actually did get a notification. Very good. What is the schedule? I mean, which nights do you stream? Irene, it is just random. It is when I can do it, right? I try to stream every night if I can, but I can't. And I don't generally stream on Sundays because I get up early on Sundays to go to church in Manhattan. And so I try to get to bed earlier on Sundays. But I try to stream every night, but I can't stream every night. Some nights I've got something going on. On Wednesdays, I tend to stream later. I tend to stream at, like 10:30 because we have a CPI members check-in at 9. So I don't tend to stream not until 10 or 10:30, on Wednesdays. But I tend to stream every night if I can, and I stream at 9 if possible. That's generally my regular stream is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Another thing is I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do for Thanksgiving. In the past, what I do on like Thanksgiving and Christmas is that I will wake up in the morning and I will stream for 4 hours. Then I'll go have a nice Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner with my wife, and then I'll stream for another 4 hours. I do all day mega streams on those days. It's kind of a fun thing I do. I'm thinking I will probably do that this year, but I'm not decided yet. I have not figured out exactly what my wife and I are going to do for Thanksgiving dinner. Once that is determined, I will determine whether or not I will do an all-day mega stream on Thanksgiving. But that's a popular thing that I do on this channel. I wake up in the morning, I get ready to stream. I do the arms thing where I hold my arms up and we start that way. And then I talk about whatever and we show different clips and we just go for 4 hours. Then I take a break and then I go have a dinner and chill. And then I come back and do another 4 hours. And I've done that many times on this channel. I'm thinking that's what will happen on Thanksgiving. Cannot guarantee it, but I'm thinking that that's what it's going to be. So there we go. So anyway, if you want to send any more questions, buy me a coffee is the best way to send them. So now I am going to start answering the questions that I have received. So here we go. All right. So the first one is from Richard. Richard, aka Unanimous, says, my observations are that Walter Rodney and Lyndon LaRouche both understood the economics of imperialism. What truly motivates colonial powers to keep countries poor. However, the governments they supported were different. Rodney supported Tanzania, North Korea, and Maoist China, and the Soviet Union and Cuba. LaRouche, interestingly, supported the Ba'athist Iraq, Syria, Putin's Russia, Lula da Silva, China, but throughout his career, they were critical of ML governments. Yet both men did observe how imperialism works and which countries did, to some extent or other, oppose it. Also, this should be clipped by anyone watching. Okay. I would agree with that. The main thing about the LaRouche people, the way I understand it, is that LaRouche was a leftist. He was a communist. He was briefly in the Communist Party. He then was in the Socialist Workers' Party for many years. Then he started giving independent Marxism classes in New York City. And Lyndon LaRouche was very, very much opposed to any concept of Malthusianism. And he was really into technological progress, and he was very, very opposed to Malthusianism, and he studied Marx's critique of Malthus, and he saw the left become overtaken by Malthusianism. Also, Lyndon LaRouche, his parents were Quakers, but they broke with the American Friends Service Committee because they thought it was too communist, and his parents were kind of John Birch Society, far-right anti-communist. His father was a shoe salesman, consultant, an advertising consultant for the shoe industry. And so it's very likely that Lyndon LaRouche also, because of his parents, was exposed to the John Birch Society and their worldview. And it seems that in the early 60s, LaRouche started to develop an interpretation of Marxism after he left the Socialist Workers' Party that kind of was very, very emphasizing opposition to Malthusianism, obviously opposing the fact that most of the Marxist groups were becoming Malthusian, and took from the John Birch Society an understanding that the Eastern establishment, the Ford Foundation, the liberal foundations that were funding the civil rights movement, etc., were Malthusian. And he developed kind of a unique interpretation of Marxism. It was like, you could call it like Marxism with John Birch Society characteristics. The John Birch Society is a far-right group. They think communism is a Wall Street conspiracy. And they are really, when it gets down to it, they're anti-monopoly. They think the monopolies are communist. And they base that on the fact that after World War II, it's true, it was the big monopolies who took down Joe McCarthy. It was the big monopolies that were in bed with American intelligence, were kind of pushing Cold War liberalism. They were conservatives. They were opposed to Cold War liberalism. And they, as a result of that, they thought that the big monopolies were communists. They were not communists, but they were liberals, and they were not free market. They were monopolies, and they were kind of, anti-monopoly, lower level capitalists. I think the founder was a guy named Jack Welch, who owned a candy company. It's the guy who owned the flat sucker, invented the flat sucker. And they were opposed to the labor movement because they were industrialists, factory owners. They were also opposed to the liberal order and McCarthyism. And they developed this kind of worldview, the Bircher worldview, this far right perspective that argued that the big monopolies were all communists. And Lyndon LaRouche studied a lot of John Birch Society material. That's clear. And he also had a background in Marxist economics and was anti-Malthusian, and he developed kind of his own synthesis, his own worldview. And he began teaching classes at the Free University in New York, and eventually his students, they joined Students for a Democratic Society, but they were the SDS Labor Committee that tried to link the student protests in Students for a Democratic Society with the labor movement. Then there was the New York City teachers strike in Harlem. the teachers of Harlem went on strike against Black nationalism. Black nationalists wanted, community control of schools. And Lyndon LaRouche, realized that the Ford Foundation also wanted community control of schools because they wanted to privatize schools. It was part of pushing school choice and privatization. So when these Black nationalists were calling for community control of schools, and the teachers in Harlem, who were mostly white, went on strike against that, most communist groups considered that to be a hate strike or a racist strike. However, Lyndon LaRouche and the SDS Labor Committee said, no, the community control of schools is actually an austerity plan. It's part of school choice and deregulation. So they supported the teachers union. So the communist groups were supporting the Black nationalists, and they got into fistfights with the teachers unions. This is the 60s, so teachers unions were much more radical, and I shouldn't say radical. They were much more, violent, right? There used to be just a lot more violence in everyday life. And so there were a lot of fistfights where the labor committees of Lyndon LaRouche and the teachers and the teachers unions were on one side, and the Black nationalists, the Black Panthers, and the communist groups were on the other side, right? A lot of people got beaten up and all of that. So that was kind of the beginning of Lyndon LaRouche being at odds with the left. And so he had his group, the National Caucus of Labor Committees. They were just kind of a communist, Trotskyist group, but they had an emphasis on opposing Malthusianism. They had an emphasis on the Eastern establishment, the liberals being the main threat. Then, and so they went out of their way to kind of challenge the Communist Party USA, which in the early 70s, the Communist Party USA was led by Angela Davis, this Black woman who became kind of their leader during those years. And the Communist Party, the 60s upsurge was kind of starting to decline, but the Communist Party, a lot of ex-hippies joined the Communist Party because it was the face of communism, right? So the Communist Party was gaining a lot of influence during those days. They had an office. They still have it on 23rd Street, but back then they had the whole building. They had a whole building on 23rd Street. Now they own the building. They only have one floor, but they used to use the whole building. They had classes every single day at their office on 23rd Street. They ran candidates for office all over New York City and things like that. This is like the Nixon administration. So because of that, the LaRouche organization made a point of kind of going to the Communist Party office and debating them. And they saw the Communist Party as the face of communism, and they were critical of communism because they thought the liberals and the Eastern establishment were the main threats. They would go to the Communist Party office and debate them. The Communist Party eventually banned them from going to their office and would remove them. And the Communist Party is also known, again, this is back in the day, people were a lot rougher, and, there would be fistfights at the Communist Party office. And then we found out that the FBI had infiltrated the Communist Party. Surprise, surprise. FBI had also infiltrated the National Caucus of Labor Committees, and was sending hateful letters to both to incite them against each other. And LaRouche people would be out on the street leafleting, and people would walk up to them and say, "We're from the Communist Party," and punch them in the face. And there'd be Communist Party people would be out leafleting, and people would say, "Oh, we're with LaRouche," and they would punch them in the face. And so there was a rivalry between the two groups. So my understanding of what happened is Lyndon LaRouche said, you know what, we're going to show that we're tough. We're going to show that we can't be messed with. And so they trained their members to fight, basically. And instead of just taking it, or instead of just whatever, they said, you know what? And they launched something called Operation Mop Up. And they said, the Communist Party thinks they can kick us around. We're going to fight back. And they did so in a way that utterly shocked and terrified everybody. No one expected them to do that. And any place the Communist Party would show up, they would show up, and there would be a scuffle. And they were basically saying, look, you've kicked us around, and you think you're the bosses of communism, and you've punched us in the face one too many times, and we're going to fight back. And their goal apparently was to completely wipe out the Communist Party on the East Coast. Now, they didn't succeed in doing that, but there were some pretty ugly fights. And after that, the Communist Party, would kind of mobilize, and a lot of the communist groups they started protecting their, the Communist Party meetings, like the Workers' World Party that I was in. Apparently, they sent their people to protect Communist Party events from Lyndon LaRouche and stuff like that. So after that, the LaRouche people were pretty well considered pariahs on the left, because they had gone after the Communist Party, and people compared them to like the black shirts and Mussolini and stuff. Well, that's kind of what the Communist Party was doing by beating them up. And communist groups fought with other communist groups all the time back then. Maoist communists, Progressive Labor Party. There was somebody who knew somebody whose eye had been broken because, they were missing an eye because they had been in the Socialist Workers' Party and the Progressive Labor Party had knocked his eye out. And that communist groups fought other communist groups a lot back then. But the LaRouche people, they launched a very sustained, targeted campaign against the Communist Party that went on for months, where they said, that the Communist Party has targeted us. We're going to wipe them out. And they even published an op-ed in their newspaper. Someone sent it to me. I think they were trying to convince me not to be friendly to the LaRouche people. And they sent me a copy of the LaRouche paper, New Solidarity. And they even published an obituary for the Communist Party, right? And they basically announced, we're going to take out the Communist Party. And they published an obituary for CPUSA. And it was like, CPUSA will no longer exist. So after they did that, they were pretty well, every communist group wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. They were pariahs. But they continued organizing. And because they were kind of hated by communist groups, they started to make new alliances. And they eventually dropped Marxism altogether and adopted American economics, the teachings of Henry Charles Carey and Friedrich List. And that's the LaRouche organization. And they understand the economics of anti-imperialism very thoroughly. They are very pro-technology. And right now, they are one of the only consistent anti-imperialist organizations in America. They stand with Russia. They stand with China. And they are against the emerging low-wage police state. And so I respect them in a lot of ways. I will say they are very paranoid. They're very, very paranoid. And a lot of their beliefs I don't accept, right? They have a particular fixation on classical music that I don't agree with. I do think classical music is a good thing, but I don't accept their premise that, that you should only listen to classical music or else you're going to go crazy. I don't accept their premise on a lot of things. There are a lot of things that they believe. I mean, they believe Karl Marx was a British agent and that Marxism was a British conspiracy. I don't think that. They have in the past, they've said things like Mao Zedong was a British agent and that Chiang Kai-shek was the real anti-imperialist of China. I don't think that. And it's interesting because LaRouche they started out as a communist group. Most of their members don't know that or don't seem to really understand or care. And that a lot of them have, they don't know about Marxism. Lyndon LaRouche knew Marxism. He taught Marxist classes, but a lot of their members are very ignorant about Marxism, and they kind of have just standard anti-communist, stuff. And, and I mean, the group has problems, right? And at one point they were speaking at our events. We were attending their events. They had me speak at a couple of their events, but we don't have that kind of relationship now. And that's fine. I mean, we don't need that kind of relationship with them. I think Jose is awesome. He's with them and we support him 100%, especially what his family's going through. And that's that, there's not much more than that. Walter Rodney was a Marxist intellectual in Guyana, who was murdered. And he wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And his writing is very key. It was very important for anti-colonial thinkers during the 1960s and 70s, Black nationalists, African anti-imperialists. Walter Rodney is a very important writer, and he was killed, assassinated, and it was really tragic. And his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, it's basically explaining the thing. It's explaining what Lenin wrote about in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. It's explaining what Henry Charles Carey wrote about in Harmony of Interests. It's that, that imperialism is about holding back development in order to maintain monopoly, which that has been lost. Right now, when you say imperialism, people have a narrative that is completely wrong, which I've ranted against many times on these streams. But both of those groups, Walter Rodney, I guess he wasn't a group, he was an intellectual. Walter Rodney, the writer who wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and the LaRouche movement have both done a very good job of emphasizing that imperialism is about opposing development. Imperialism is about holding back development and opposing development, which is, I mean, that's correct. And that is something that used to be common knowledge and common sense among Marxists, but has now been lost and replaced by Avatar. So it's unfortunate, but that's the case. Now, Kate bought 3 coffees, and she said, I listened to your chat with Chris Cutrone today. 2 questions. What is, and maybe this one is stupid. No, you're fine. What is the dictatorship of the proletariat? And 2, it's not clear. What is your essential disagreement with Chris? I thought it was a great debate. Well, my first of all, about the conversation with Chris, I went on there and I thought, I'm not going to debate him. I watched his debate with one of these other quote unquote Stalinists, and I thought, I just don't want to be that guy, right? Platypus is an interesting group in that they seem to be working very hard to facilitate discussion. And they're also kind of at odds with the majority of the left. And they've always been a mystery to me. And so rather than get on there and try to tell him he's wrong, first of all, it's not even clear what they really believe. And even after that debate, it's also not quite clear to me what they really believe. They're kind of saying that the left, Marxism, has lost its way. We're trying to get back to what Marx actually wrote about. That's why he calls himself the last Marxist. They're trying to provoke a discussion about what Marxism really means and gets people to question real discussions. So in answer to your second question, where is our disagreement? I don't know. I mean, I feel like my disagreement is that I am building a real organization of activists that is dedicated to anti-imperialism. In the past, I have heard various people affiliated with Platypus say that imperialism doesn't exist, right? They don't accept the Leninist theory of imperialism. Now, you'll notice Chris Cutrone did not say that in our conversation, so I can't say that he thinks that, but I've seen other people, they don't go around promoting the Leninist theory of imperialism. I do. That's a central part of what I believe is anti-imperialism and supporting anti-imperialist movements, opposing the economic system of imperialism. That is the what it's all about for me, right? Anyway, I mean, that's what it's all about. And I've even said that a lot of Marxism needs to be, reconsidered. I don't accept dialectical materialism. I believe in God. I certainly don't accept a lot of the Eurocentrism of Marx. And I almost, I even question the idea that it's a quote unquote class struggle. I think in a lot of ways, we've seen the way socialism has come into the world. It has been entire nations, right? Like China, like Cuba. It's been nations fighting for all the people of that nation against imperialism. Marx's whole thing is it's the workers versus the bosses, right? And that the whole polemic that Engels had with Friedrich List and with Düring. If you read Anti-Düring by Engels, the whole point was, well, no, it's workers versus capitalists, and we can't be fighting in the interest of the entire nation. Well, actually, the Chinese Revolution was in the interest of the entire nation. The Cuban Revolution was in the interest of the entire nation. And Lenin said that, the class struggle is going to shift to be the struggle of the nation against the imperialist monopoly. So in a way, I mean, a lot of Marx has to be reconsidered. I'm more Leninist than I am Marxist. I'm more Stalinist than I am Leninist. And, I am an innovationist. We have got a new synthesis that we have developed, a celebration of human progress, an opposition to what we call globalism, imperialism, trying to strive for people to not live biologically. We've developed innovationism, which is our completely new synthesis. It's our new movement, our new development. Right. We have the Khrushchevism book and the great breakthroughs we've made on that in terms of how to hold an organization together against psychological warfare. We're doing something new. And that's what's exciting about us. Right. And that's what we should be doing. Right. If someone, the idea that we can just dig into ideology of the past and apply it, it's not going to work in our time. We have to build a new movement. And that's what we're doing with innovationism. We may make mistakes along the way and we'll try to learn from our mistakes. But I think it's time to build a new movement that is serious. And if we just stay stuck in communism, we're going to be left behind. Now, as far as the first question, what is the dictatorship of the proletariat? I'll just explain the Marxist concept, right? Marx coined that term, right? And, the word dictatorship has, especially since then, taken on, we think of a dictator as being one person. But dictatorship means the rule, right? If you are dictating to a person what they write, you're telling them what to write. The dictatorship is the one who dictates, right? The dictatorship is the one who has the ability to dictate, right? So the understanding is that right now, our government is a dictatorship of the capitalists, right? That the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, they run the government. They are the dictators. They dictate the policies. We live in the dictatorship of one class, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. So Marx's understanding was that the struggle of the working class against the capitalist class was that, as a result of capitalist economic crisis, the workers would get poorer and poorer and poorer. There'd be more and more unemployment. And eventually the workers would have no choice but to rise up and, quote, win the battle of democracy and establish what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat, to seize control of the government. So instead of the capitalists dictating, the working class, the majority, would dictate, right? It would be the rule of the working class over the government. And then with the dictatorship of the proletariat, the dictatorship of the working class, seizing control of the government, they would then centralize the economy, put the economy under central control, central planning. That was the idea, right? So dictatorship of the proletariat is the struggle to seize control of the state. And it became a central part of Leninism because after Marx's death, there were, people like Bernstein that wanted to water it down. And they said, well, win the battle for democracy, which is what Marx said. It's the seize control of the state, win the battle for democracy. They said, well, that just means voting, right? We'll just, we'll have universal male suffrage and we can elect people, and that'll be winning the battle for democracy, and the working class majority will outvote the capitalists. Lenin wrote an important book called The State and Revolution, where he said, no. The struggle to establish the dictatorship of the proletariat is the struggle to seize control of the state, right? We are effectively seizing control of the state, and we want to build a completely new state. We don't want to just get elected and gradually take control of the existing state. We want to come to power and dismantle the old state and create an entirely new state, that the capitalist state was formed to serve capitalism, and that we are struggling to establish a new government, a government of the working class to serve the working class. And that became an important point of Leninism, right? As opposed to, social democracy. Social democracy was saying we'll just get elected and gradually reform things. Bolshevism, Marxism, Leninism was saying, well, we want to seize power. So they emphasized this term, the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, after Stalin died, Khrushchev dropped the term dictatorship of the proletariat. And he said that actually the Soviet Union was not a dictatorship of the proletariat. It was a, quote, state of the entire people. And that was part of Khrushchev's reforms. And I don't think that was necessarily wrong, right? In China, they have always said they are not a dictatorship of the proletariat. They are what they call a people's democracy, right? After World War II, after the Second World War, in countries that had been liberated by Soviet troops, they established new governments. And in a lot of the countries where the Soviet Union, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, in a lot of the countries that were liberated by communists, the Communist Party that existed there was very, very small. It was really, really small. And as a result, it couldn't just be the Communist Party that would take power, because it wouldn't make sense, right? And like in Albania, the Communist Party at the beginning of the Second World War, it had been like less than 30 people. And, they were pretty big by the end of the Second World War, but they were still not big enough. And so what they did in the various countries that the Soviet troops had liberated is they got all of the anti-fascist parties together. The Social Democratic Party, in some countries, they had a Christian Democratic Party, and they would get all of the anti-fascist parties together, and they would merge into one party. And that party would be what was called a People's Democratic Party, meaning that party represented the entire nation in the struggle for democracy and popular power against fascism. And so, if you look at what was happening in East Germany and Romania and Czechoslovakia, these were people's democracies. That's why North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The ruling party of North Korea is not the Communist Party. After World War II, the Communist Party of Korea merged with the Social Democratic Party of Korea and the Christian Party of Korea into the Korean Workers' Party. And if you read the North Korean Constitution, it says we are a people's democratic government. Now, I think later they changed that. I think in like the 1960s, they said we've become dictatorship of the proletariat, or we've become a full socialist country. But originally they were not, right? And China said they were not a socialist country. They were a people's democracy, or a new democratic society in the 1950s. It wasn't until the 60s that China said they were fully a socialist society. So, already after the Second World War, communist governments were kind of losing the dictatorship of the proletariat thing, and they were emphasizing people's democracy as the road to power. And that's when William Z. Foster, the leader of the Communist Party of the United States, who is really important, that's when he developed the concept of what he called an anti-monopoly government. Right? That was a brilliant formation that I really have learned a lot from. After World War II, the Communist Party of the United States said, you know what, we're not fighting for a workers' government in America. We're not fighting for dictatorship of the proletariat in America. We're fighting for an anti-monopoly government. And I think that is correct, actually. A government that represents farmers, small business owners, unemployed people, industrial workers, all kinds of people against the big monopolies, the imperialists, right? And I agree with that. And that's not classically Marxist, right? Marx is you're talking about the industrial worker versus the factory owner. And that's just, in our day and age, it's not that. And towards the end of my conversation with Chris Gutrone, I said, look, if you look at the situation, the gig economy worker sees himself as an entrepreneur. And that the idea that we're going to, build a movement on the basis of labor union consciousness, that's just not going to be the case. It's rather going to be building an anti-monopoly coalition, which is what the Communist Party said in the 1950s, which is what happened in China. It's what happened in Eastern Europe. And generally every country since the Soviet Union that has had socialism, it has been an anti-monopoly coalition, right? It's been a block of different classes coming together against the power of the big monopolies. And what have they been fighting for? They've been fighting for their ability to grow, to have economic growth, because the imperialists want to degrow. Well, now in this fourth stage of the capitalist system, right? Capitalism had primitive accumulation, then industrialization, then globalism, imperialism, but we're now entering the stage of destructive accumulation. In the period of destructive accumulation, the system of globalism, imperialism is degrowing America. So we have to build a pro-growth coalition, an anti-monopoly coalition, a pro-growth, pro-humanity, anti-monopoly coalition for a government of action that fights for working families, right? That's basically what we're fighting for. And so dictatorship of the proletariat, I want only the wage worker to rule. That's not, no. I think small business owners will be part of an anti-imperialist government that comes into existence. And in fact, they're an essential part of it. And you go to any communist country, Vietnam, China, small business owners are a big part of it, right? They're not doing the dictatorship of the proletariat thing anymore, right? So the dictatorship of the proletariat is the thing that Marx said. It's a thing that Lenin clarified and crafted. It's a thing that then Khrushchev moved away from. It's a thing that China doesn't have. It's a concept that I don't think, more or less, I don't really think it applies to modern times. There's a couple things from it, though, that do apply. One is you have to build a new state, right? And this is really important, right? Bolivia, right? Evo Morales did great things, but he didn't build a new state. Right? That they had a regular capitalist state. And as a result, Evo Morales was ousted. And now Bolivia, it's moving away from socialism. Venezuela, on the other hand, they built a new state. They got elected democratically, but then they passed a new constitution. They created a completely new military that is trained in Cuba. They created a new state. And that's why Venezuela is still in power. Same with Nicaragua. They took power in the 1980s. They created a new state. Then that new state lost the elections, and people that were opposed to socialism were in power in the 90s. But then they were able to retake control because they had control of the state. They had built a state modeled on their revolution. And that, yes, ultimately the process of establishing a society that is not capitalist is building a new state. You cannot just take the capitalist state and reform it. So that's dictatorship of the proletariat. But I don't believe in the class purity that is a big part. I don't, that's a big part of Trotskyism. That's a big part of classical Marxism, is this class purity. Only the industrial worker is truly revolutionary. Only he has the correct class line. I don't believe that anymore. I just don't. Right. And I do believe that increasingly we're moving toward a society where the worker sees himself as a small business owner. Right. And the demand is for a state that breaks the power of the big monopolies and invests in society overall and enables everyone to invent and create. That's what we're fighting for. And that's called innovationism, that we're not fighting for the factories to be owned by the government and the government to be led by industrial workers. That's just not the age we're living in. That's why we're innovationists. And again, there are people, a lot of them in America, that think that that is what they're fighting for. Right. That is what they're fighting for. Oh, goodness gracious. That is what they're fighting for. And if that's the case, that's fine. But that's not what we're fighting for. We're not fighting for the industrial worker with the line of the industrial worker to seize control of the government and the government to nationalize the factories under the control of the industrial worker. That's just not what we're fighting for. So, that's why we're innovationists. And it's hard for a lot of people to give up the communist lexicon and all of that. But I mean, we have to be serious, right? And again, are we trying to be popular with the small minority of Americans who call themselves communists? Or are we trying to actually build a movement that can win over the masses of people to anti-imperialism? And that's what we need to understand. All right. So there we go. On that note, we will now answer the next question. Gabby sent her question in, and Gabby's question is, what's everything going on in the world, the conflicts, the crises, and the constant intensity? With everything going on in the world, the conflicts, the crises, the constant intensity, how do you unwind? What helps you stay grounded in times like these? I am so thankful for the work of Wallace D. Wattles, right? I listened to Wallace Wattles, The Science of Being Great, The Science of Getting Rich, How to Promote Yourself, The Making of a Man Who Can't. He emphasizes you have to think positive. You have to think positive and optimistically. You have to picture in your mind the way you want things to be. I listen to that stuff on loop all day long. I've listened to that. I'm not even listening. It's background noise, but it has been so helpful to me to not focus on the negative, not focus on rivalries, not focus on people who've harmed you in the past, but to just focus on the way things can be better, the projects you can do, find your own creative energy. I love Wallace Wattles, and there's, it's public domain. There's a lot of audio recordings. I have downloaded the audio files of Wallace Wattles' important works, and I just put them on. I put them on, and I wake up with classical music in the morning. I go to bed with classical music in the morning, and throughout the day, when I'm walking around or whatever, when I'm getting dressed or I'm doing whatever, I put Wallace Wattles on as background music, and I just the words are really helpful to me in staying focused and not being negative. That may not be what you were looking for. You may have been wondering how I, relax or whatever, but that's the answer that I can give you, which is Wallace Wattles. Learn to relax, learn to chill, etc. That's what I do. And I've learned to be positive, and it's helpful. And it's made a really big difference in my life, I will say. Is the Wallace Wattles stuff, having it on, has really helped me in a lot of ways. And just learning to expect the best from the world. It's been very, very helpful. So I hope that gives you an answer. And Gabby's next question is, this is the only time I'll ask this, and you don't even have to answer. Why do so many streamers build content that looks like CPI materials, yet they can never actually be what we are? Is there a reason this happens? Is it intentional? Like, were being set up to be compared to them? Are there any historical examples of movements dealing with this kind of imitation? Well, the answer is yes, Gabby. Yes, there's a couple examples that I can point to. One example is that it's very clear that during the 1970s, there were fake communist parties that were created, and particularly Maoist communist parties that were not real. And they were created as part of the process of trying to court China as an ally against Russia, against the Soviet Union. And that the October League in particular was a communist party in the United States, had a lot of serious communists in it who were very real. But it appears to some degree or other, it was an effort to court the Chinese government it was serving some kind of intelligence purpose, and it wasn't real. And there's a documentary you can watch about like when China had its reform and opening up. And there's a photographer in it who says, oh, well, I couldn't get a visa to go into China, so I joined the October League. And that's how I got me a visa. And you look at some of these fake communist groups that exist nowadays that do imitate us, but are not us. And you look at that and, you ask questions. You know what I mean? And like I talk about the sleeper organizations. That's something I've been talking about a lot lately is sleeper organizations. They may want to use them for a false flag or some kind of provocation in the future. So there's that. The other thing is that when Eugene Debs ran for president in 1912, Vladimir Lenin wrote a very important article about the 1912 election, which I would recommend. 1912 election article by Lenin. And they talked about how Eugene Debs was getting a lot of votes, as a socialist, as a socialist candidate. And so in order to take votes away from Debs, former U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt formed his own party called the Bull Moose Party. And the Bull Moose Party was a party that talked about the mistreatment of factory workers. It was a party that talked about, about child labor and issues, the power of the trusts. And apparently the final paragraph of its manifesto said their goal was to expropriate the capitalists, meaning that I guess they kind of sort of believed in socialism. But if you read Lenin's article from 1912, he says that it's very clear the Bull Moose Party was formed to take votes away and attention away from Debs, right? That Eugene Debs was building this mass popular movement of workers against capitalism. So the Bull Moose Progressive Party was formed as a way that somebody who was already president, former president, popular guy, could talk about the issues that communists talk about, and I guess kind of hint that maybe he wanted the same thing that the communists wanted. Right. But not be Eugene Debs. And also the Bull Moose Progressive Party was very, very much in favor of colonialism. Theodore Roosevelt was famous for sending the White Fleet, his White Fleet of big, mighty warships around the world to threaten countries. And that it was like a way to try and link working class issues at home with colonialism around the world. It was pretty awful. That was the Bull Moose Party. So that's an example of, in the Bull Moose Party, they clearly studied what Eugene Debs was doing, and they made a version of it that was more acceptable to the American establishment, the Bull Moose Progressive Party. There's other examples of things like this, right? The other thing, though, is that you got to be careful with all of this. And this is why, look, I was just on here telling you how much I've studied Lyndon LaRouche and the LaRouche movement and how much I've drawn from them over the years. I don't deny that. I've learned a lot from them, right? And, we're not copying what they've done. We're obviously doing our own thing. Innovationism is our own thing, but we've studied them. I was in the Workers' World Party of Sam Marcy for many years, and I studied that party excessively, and I learned all about Sam Marcy and his teachings and his movement. And am I copying what they did? No, but I've learned from it. Everything that exists is influenced by everything else. That's why intellectual property is very tricky, right? Nothing, so everything is influenced by everything else. So, are there people out there that sound like CPI? Yes. Does CPI sound like things that have come before? Yes. I've studied William Z. Foster. I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years. I've hung out and spent a lot of time with the LaRouche people. I've visited various anti-imperialist countries like Iran and Venezuela and Russia. And, so, is all of this just purely something that I invented with my own genius? No, right? I drew from many different wells and sources. That said, are there people out there that are drawing from us? Sure. And in a way, that's a compliment. It's a compliment. My only problem, right, and I have to say this gently because, again, I don't even really want to focus on this, is that there are people who watch what we do here very closely, and they watch us in a way that they try to utilize what we do here against us, right? It's one thing if you just utilize it for your own self. They utilize it against us. For example, right, I know for a fact that, my book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. This book, a number of very important people in Midwest Marx have read this book. They've read this book, right? Because they don't know their shit, and they've read this book. Okay, that's great. They've read this book. But do they ever acknowledge me? No. Do they ever give me any credit for anything? No, because they view me as a competitor. So basically what they're doing is they're going through this book and saying, what can I use for myself in order to destroy Caleb? Not helpful, not appreciated, right? Midwest Marx, for example, one issue that we fought for like crazy was the issue of socialist patriotism. We got so viciously attacked on that. I got my reputation destroyed. You're a Nazi. Patriotic socialism is actually Nazism. So out of the blue, Midwest Marx decides they believe in American socialism, patriotism. They believe in it too. And, that's nice. I'm glad they believe in it. But it'd be nice if they would say the way we got canceled for it, the way Peter Coffin and I were viciously targeted over it was wrong. But they wouldn't do that because that would draw attention to us. And then we would be taking views away from them. And they're competitive assholes, right? And so they basically, and when we confronted them about it, their response was, no, we made this up all by ourselves. No, our patriotic socialism is totally different than yours. Well, maybe it is, and that's fine. But you have to admit, the people attacking us and the people attacking you are attacking us for the same reasons. And we're making the same arguments in defense of it. And you could just have the basic decency to say, all those people on the internet who were saying that Caleb and Peter Coffin were Nazis, that's wrong. It's pretty basic stuff. But why would they do that when they want everyone to watch them? Because they're competitive assholes. And that's how social media is. Social media is not good for your brain. Social media makes you a competitive asshole, right? Midwest Marx, they've never organized anything. They've never done any real activism in their lives. One of them, some dude bro wrestler guy. They've never done any real activism. They're just dudes who want to be famous on the internet. I don't know if they're FBI plants. They may just be sincere dudes who want to be famous on the internet. But that's all they care about is they want to be famous on the internet. They don't care about building a real movement. And I'll tell you how I know that. Did they do anything for the Uhuru movement? Anything, right? They had a court date, Tampa, Florida. They had their trial. Were they there? Jill Stein was there. I was there. Charles Barron was there. Didn't see him. They had their sentencing. I was there. Jill Stein was there. Charles Barron was there. Scott Ritter was there. Didn't see him. They claim to support Russia. But here is a group of activists that are going to prison. They're threatening them with 15 years in prison for supporting Russia, and they didn't do shit to support them. Why? Well, if we talk about their case, people will watch them and not us. Oh, okay. That's the problem. My problem is not people sounding like other people or people sounding like us. My problem is competitive assholes who it doesn't occur to them that, like, geez, they're imprisoning the Uhuru movement for speaking up. Maybe we should do everything we can to support them so they don't set a precedent so they can come after us. But they're too selfish to think that way. These are selfish young men. They all think they're Lenin. They all think they're the next Stalin, they're the next Lenin. Why would they care about anybody else? If somebody else is under attack, why help them? Right? Like Jose, right? We saw that Jose is under attack right now, right? Jose is not working with our organization. We haven't been in touch, but we supported Jose. And Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, right? We see that she's under attack. We support that. You know, generally, if the state comes for somebody who is under attack, it is your obligation to support them. It's pretty basic, right? If somebody is getting canceled and smeared on social media because they believe something that you believe, you should probably support them. If somebody is getting thrown in jail because they believe something that you believe, you should support them. That's basic human decency and common sense. These assholes don't have basic human decency and common sense. Midwest Marks, they've never built a movement. They've never done any real activism. All they think about all day long is, how many likes and shares did I get? How many likes and shares did I get? That's all they think about. So because that's all they think about, they see somebody else being attacked. They see me being defamed widely for patriotic socialism. They're fine with that. Woo! Now all those people who, Caleb's getting his reputation destroyed and more people can watch us. Woo! Uhuru movement. They're being thrown in jail for supporting Russia. Good, right? Now all the people who support Russia won't watch them because they're in jail. They'll watch us. Yeah, we're going to get more likes and shares. That's who they are. They're fucking assholes. I mean, and that's just apparent to me. And my issue is not, Gabby, please don't misunderstand me. My issue is not them reading our stuff, right, and sounding like it. My issue is them going through our stuff to find material to weaponize against us, right? That's my issue, right? And I would have no problem with it. I would have no problem with them sounding like us. And in a way, even them doing that is a compliment. But the point is, if you're building a real movement, you want the whole movement to succeed. They don't. They want to be internet famous. They don't care about the movement. A lot of their people don't even live in America. They packed up and got out of here so they could live in some other place, right? They don't care. They don't care, right? And that's my problem. Social media is bad for organizing. Right? Social media makes people very selfish. It makes people very, very narcissistic. They look inside, they look in the mirror, right? It makes people very jealous and competitive. And I view these fake socialist groups that you asked about that are not really groups, they're the incarnation of that, right? Uhuru movement goes to jail, for, gets dragged into federal court for believing what they believe, and they don't do shit about it. It doesn't even occur to them to do shit about it. When we've confronted them, why didn't you do shit for Uhuru? We tweeted about it. We tweeted about it. Oh, you tweeted about it. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Wow. We raised it with Russian President Putin. We put on UN press conferences. We put on a UN press conference, and two individuals now that are now associated with some fake trends. The press conference was about the Uhuru case. I mentioned the Uhuru case. They didn't. Think about that, right? We're having a press conference about the Uhuru case at the United Nations, about how, the Uhuru movement, they've been prosecuted for going to Russia. We're about to go to Russia. We're worried they might do that to us. And so that's why we're having a press conference. That's the theme of the press conference. And I'm speaking. I open the press conference and I read a statement about the Uhuru movement. And then it goes to one of these assholes and he talks about himself. And then it goes to another one of these assholes and she talks about herself. Think about that, right? I mean, there's a level of, and I mean, I could go on and on about this, but there's really no point, right? When people are selfish assholes and competitive assholes and people have no notion of building a movement, they just want to be famous on the internet. That's all they care about. Some of them may be cops, and I believe the government to some degree or other is boosting them to try and, take attention away from us, which is, I mean, whatever. But at the end of the day, it doesn't even really matter, right? You can't organize with people like that. You can't. I mean, you can't. Like if people are, if you bend over backwards, you fly people to events, you do everything you can, and then the second that, there might be some drama or the second somebody else is going to make them more internet famous, you just have to say no. You have to just say no. I mean, that's all there is to it. I mean, and it's tragic that people are like this and people grow up. And that's the problem with social media is that it makes people grow up slower, but people grow up. People grow up because, I mean, what I have been surprised about with a lot of these young men is not that they're acting selfishly. It's that they're acting against their own long-term interests. They're just incapable of understanding that, right? It's one, I don't expect you to work in my interest. I expect you to work in your own interest, you know? And in order to work in your own interest, you have to be able to think, oh, wow, if I had allies down the road, I might be able to accomplish much. But they don't think that. That doesn't occur to them, right? They want to be internet famous, right? And, you know, and it's just, they're just thinking about the next 2-3 days and how many more likes and shares they're going to get and how much more attention they're going to get from themselves. And eventually they're going to get to the point where they realize, you know, if they're serious, okay, let me put it this way. I think there's a lot of them that are not sincere, that are just con artists and hustlers, and to some degree or other FBI agents. Some of them may be sincere. The ones that are sincere, if they continue to be sincere, will get to the point that they realize that if you want to succeed, you generally shouldn't act like an asshole. But, you know, it'll take them a long time to realize that. So I don't know. You know, and honestly, the whole point of CPI from the beginning, our slogan has been out of the movement to the masses, meaning we don't want to be just another communist group. We don't want to be king of the protest cage. Since these streams have been starting, I've been saying, don't be king of the protest cage. We want to get to the masses. And one of these people who quit CPI, turned against CPI, word got back to me about his big plan after he quit CPI. He, you know, he couldn't, you know, he wrecked CPI basically, and he did a lot of damage as he was leaving. He couldn't just leave. He like caused problems. And word got back to me about what his big plan was. And I heard it and I couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. It was so sad. His plan was that, you know, he lives in this other country. And that, you know, his plan post CPI, he formed this new group that had some big, long, complicated, the International Institute for the Study of blah, 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 blah. It was like one of the worst names I've ever heard. They had like 2 Zoom calls. That was it. And his plan was, he announced that all these groups, all the communist groups in America, the PSL, the Workers' World Party, the Communist Party, they were all going to merge into one organization. They were going to go to this other country with delegates. And he would be the leader of all the communist groups in America merging into one as he lives in this other country. And I heard that and I thought, my God, you want to talk about dumb? I mean, and I heard that and it's like, again, it's like, that's not that, like, that's like what every like person thinks when they first become a communist, is they think, okay, you know, I'm going to get all the communist groups in America to merge into one, right? There's all these different communist groups and they all hate each other, but I'm going to get them to all merge into one. And I'll be so smart because I did that. Everyone will see how great I am. And then you just learn through life experience. You learn through life experience. Nope. Right? You learn, oh, actually, these groups are separate for a reason. Oh, actually, if someone could unite them all into one, they would have by now. And, you know, you just have to learn that. And that's part of, you know, they talk about like babies are the most narcissistic creature there is because they have no ability to do anything for themselves. They cry and they get food, right? And so when you're a baby, you're completely selfish. But as you mature, you become aware of other people's needs and other people's desires. You become aware of your own lack of power and ability, right? Young people are often very overconfident. They think, I can do anything, right? But you gradually learn, oh, I have my limitations. You learn to work around your limitations, work within your limitations, right? And that it's just a sign of immaturity, right? And this guy who was convinced, I was blown away by how immature he was, right? That he really did believe that in this other country, without even being in the United States, that he was going to get all the communist groups to merge, which will never happen. And how out of touch with CPI he was. The whole time CPI has been around, we've been saying out of the movement to the masses. We don't want to unite with the communist groups. We want to build a real anti-imperialist movement that could actually win over the masses of people. And that these communist groups will never do that. And that they're out of touch and we don't care what they think. That's the whole point of CPI. This guy never understood the point of CPI. He never understood what out of the movement to the masses means. He never got it. And you just had these great delusions of grandeur. I am so amazing. And I heard that and I'm just like, damn. And like, that leads me to believe the person is probably sincere. He's just extremely immature. There are other people involved that I do not think are sincere. But that person, I think he just didn't get it, right? Like, the communist groups in America all suck. They all suck. And if they all merged, you'd have 20,000 people in a country of 300 million in a group, it'd have 20,000 people in a group that sucks. And in order to get that 20,000 people in a room together in the same group, that group would have to suck so bad because it would have to accommodate all the sucking of all the different groups. Hate to put it that way, but it's true. All the communist groups are completely incompetent and irrelevant. And if you add up all their members, you've got about 20,000 people at the most, right? Most of those groups have less than 500, okay? So like if you added up every single person in every communist group, you're looking at about 20,000 at the most, probably less than that. And all of those groups are ineffective and incompetent and in their own unique way. And they would never merge with each other because they all hate each other. However, if one was to try and merge them, one would have to accommodate so much of what keeps them isolated. You would have to keep so many people happy. You would develop a compromised institution, an institution based on compromising all of that incompetence. You would have an epically incompetent organization. That's what you would have. You would have an epically incompetent organization. It would be like all of their incompetence combined. And that's not what CPI was formed to do. CPI was formed to build a serious movement. And so we don't care what these people think, right? We're not interested in being the king of communism and being king of the protest gates. That was the whole point when we formed CPI, out of the movement to the masses. Why did we call it CPI? We didn't call it a party. It's not like the New Workers Fight Back Liberation Party. It's not a party. We're a center for political innovation, meaning it's time to have new ideas, not do the same old thing, right? That's the idea, right? Is we're innovating, right? That's the whole point. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm glad that's the only time you're going to ask that question, Gabby. I know you asked that question with good intent, but it's still, I don't know. We talk way too much about this kind of thing on these streams. I'll just be blatantly honest. We really should just not talk about this kind of stuff because it's just, we go over it and over and over and it's really demoralizing. And we're honestly doing really, really great stuff right now as an organization. CPI is growing. CPI is expanding. New members are coming. We're going to have a great, awesome event in New Jersey. It's going to be a really tremendous event and a lot of good things happen. A lot of things are lining up in very good ways. And I'm feeling particularly optimistic at the moment. I think that a lot of good is on the horizon. So I would encourage people to come to our upcoming event in New Jersey. Register if you haven't registered. We really do need people to register so we know how much food to prepare and things like that. It's going to be a full buffet. It's going to be great. It's going to be a great event. We're going to honor some local activists. It's going to be really, really tremendous. So I really hope to see you all there. It's going to be great. Thanks to everyone who sent questions. And I think we'll probably end it here. We're way past the 3-hour mark. So I think we'll probably end it here. So on that note, I am going to put on the closing music and I wish you all the best and we'll be back tomorrow. I think tomorrow I may stream with Garland tomorrow. It looks like it's going to be a Garland Nixon stream tomorrow. So keep your eyes out for that. But here we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, And the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today.